Conversations for the Future, second day, St. Patty's Day. So hopefully the luck of the Irish is with all of us. I'm Meredith Garfalo. I am a meteorologist at News 12 New York, and I'm also a space and science journalist. Different things from videos and storytelling and all that exciting stuff. And so it's an honor to be back and to be moderating our session today. And so don't forget to reach out on LinkedIn, everybody. Let's connect, let's talk, let's tell some good stories. And starting off actually with our first guest that'll be sharing some really exciting information. We have Nathan Wiggum. Nathan has been placing debt and equity since 2006, and he's been involved in over 1 billion of transactions up and down the capital stack. He's the founder and president of EN Capital, which is an advisory firm that's based in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Nathan has also developed over 6 megawatts of renewable energy projects with entities such as the United States Air Force, municipalities, hospitals, and others. He also has experience working with commercial building energy systems and has been involved in a variety of entrepreneurial ventures in different industries. He holds a graduate certificate in space law through the law school at the University of Mississippi and an MBA from the Marshall School of Business at the University in Southern California. And if that wasn't cool enough, also a Bachelor of Science in Systems Engineering from the University of Arizona, along with the California Real Estate Broker's license. He lives in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I'm jealous because it's warmer than here, with his wife, and he has a passion for finance, space, traveling, sailing, and the outdoors. And then the other part is Charles Stotler. He is co-director of the Center for Air and Space Law at the University of Mississippi School of Law. He teaches LLM courses on the international space law, cybersecurity law, and the U.S. national aviation law, also serving as a faculty I lost my train. A faculty advisor for master's thesis. His research focuses on the effects of the fragmentation of international law on aerospace governance and a rule law for other space activities. So we're very excited to have you guys kick it off and talk a little bit about your paper. So I think we said that Charles was going to go first for a little bit, Nathan, and then of course, everyone that's here today, don't forget, if you think of a question, put it in the chat. We'll save the last 10 minutes for a little bit of Q&A.
Thanks, Meredith. Thanks for the intro. And I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. We have some slides we'd like to show you all. Let me know if you're seeing the slide deck right now. Is that coming through for everybody? Great. As Meredith said, my name is Charles Stotler. I'm co-director of the Center for Air and Space Law at the University of Mississippi School of Law. I'll be presenting today with Nathan Wiggum. We'd like to thank Foundation for the Future for having us, particularly Tim and his team. The presentation we're going to give you today is a snapshot of a white paper that's also being released today through the Foundation of the Future. And I just want to provide a little background on that. The genesis of the research that we did was really just curiosity. It was a true academic inquiry. Nate was a student in our graduate certificate program, which is a program that opens our space law classes up for non-lawyers. And his background is finance, so we got talking about space finance, particularly how the space industry is financed, and quickly discovered that we didn't know much. So that sent us on a journey in which we did a series of interviews with a whole bunch of actors in the space industry, operators of LEO and GEO constellations, plus insurance providers, law firms, export credit agencies. So we've spoke to a bunch of people. We did some of our research of our own. And what we realized is that over the past several years, the space industry has been evolving in a way that makes credit more relevant than it had been in previous decades. And so what I'm going to present to you first is a snapshot of the current space economy, a description of that evolution, a look at how capital is currently deployed in the space industry, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nate, who's going to present some use cases that we think demonstrate the relevance of credit for the space industry. So starting off with the space economy, it is, if it has not already, it is going to surpass $400 billion. So what you see on your screen there are numbers from the Satellite Industry Association from 2020. So they're reflecting the industry in 2019. That valuation has increased since then. It's currently, as of 2020 valuation, is 371 billion. So it's growing. And of course, these are estimates. The Space Foundation, for example, valued the space economy in 2020 at 447 billion. But regardless, the takeaway is we're looking at about $400 billion space economy. To put that into context, if the space industry were a country, it would be the 39th largest country in the world. But perhaps more important than the overall value is the rate of growth. Some estimate that the space economy has grown by 55% in the past decade, which is just remarkable. And it's projected to approach 1 trillion by 2040. I'm sure many of you have heard that statistic. That is likely a conservative estimate. But to add some context, we provide this chart on the lower right-hand corner of the screen. Bear in mind, we're mixing metaphors a little bit here because that chart on the lower right-hand corner of the screen demonstrates the US economy by sector. And we're talking about the global space economy here with that $1 trillion projection. But regardless, if the global space economy hits $1 trillion, it will then be amongst the top 10 largest industries in the US. So we're talking about an absolutely enormous economy. So where is this growth coming from? Obviously, it's coming from the provision of new services to new customer bases. But that necessarily entails a growth in assets in orbit. And as of 2020, there were 2,460 operational satellites in orbit. But again, these are 2020 numbers reflecting the state of the industry in 2019. By 2021, the number of operational satellites in orbit has jumped to a whopping 4,877. And that number has grown since. So it's doubled in the past 2 years, past year. Which is absolutely remarkable. So aiding this growth are a couple of things. Reduced launch costs, but more importantly for our purposes, an evolution in the nature of space assets themselves. So historically, space assets were bespoke. They were very expensive. They were very large. They were very heavy. So by way of example, on the right-hand side of your screen, towards the top, what you see is a military weather satellite, DMSP F-13. It was launched in 1995. It was the size of a one-car garage. In 2015, it exploded in orbit due to a battery malfunction, and it created 147 pieces of trackable debris. By contrast, what you see at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen is Spire's LEMUR, or Low Earth Multi-Use Receiver, nanosatellite. It's as tall as a bottle of wine. It's part of a 143 satellite constellation that is already fully deployed. So satellites have become much cheaper to manufacture and deploy. This new architecture creates flexibility in use. And if something goes wrong, there's less of a chance of the creation of dangerous debris. This constellation being smaller than even the amount of debris that occurred as a result of the breakup of the larger satellite in 2015. So what we're talking about today are space assets. Now, there's no precise definition of what constitutes a space asset. The definition we like to use is any human-made space-related object that has value. But it's important to note that this term can be used more broadly to include terrestrial equipment, things used for telemetry and control and communication with an object that's in orbit. Terrestrial equipment creates important considerations for the finance of space assets. But for our purposes today, what we're considering are financing assets that are in orbit, so objects in orbit. So we're looking at the things you see on your screen there, currently existing satellites, mega constellations. We're also thinking about things that are coming down the pike, though, things such as orbital servicing vehicles that can extend the useful life of satellites. And we're thinking in the longer term about how to deploy financial vehicles to finance larger infrastructure projects in the future. And we think that it's important to demonstrate now the relevance of credit for existing assets in order to poise the financial industry to deal with these larger infrastructure projects in the future. So today we're talking about traditional satellite telecoms, big geosats. But another important thing to note is that even traditional geosats are changing. Flexible use geosats are under development, and traditional actors who have been working, providing geotelecoms for a number of years now are considering hybrid LEO geo constellations. We're also talking about, we've already mentioned LEO constellations, but we're thinking, mega constellations that are being deployed now for provision of Wi-Fi services, but also remote sensing satellites. There are, as you can see from your screen, a number of companies have rolled out remote sensing satellite constellations in the previous years. And as I mentioned, we're talking about orbital servicing vehicles that can promise to extend the useful life of satellites. And as you can see from your screen, a couple of examples that these technologies seem futuristic. They're already being currently tested and deployed. So that is the assets that have been deployed that are relevant for our discussion today. But how has capital been deployed to finance these assets and the activities that are associated with these assets? Over the past decade, there's been a significant movement of capital into the industry, particularly for new space and new startups. Between 2012 and 2019, $186 billion has moved into the industry. This would not include capital that was raised by SPACs last year, so that amount of capital moving into the industry is actually much greater. And we do talk about SPACs in the white paper, but I don't think we're going to talk too much about them today, but we can talk about that a little bit in Q&A if folks like. Most of the capital moving into the industry, at least for new companies, has been through seed and venture capital, which, as you can see from the slide, represented 94% of investment in new companies in 2019 alone. By contrast, debt financing has made up only a very small portion of the $5.7 billion invested in the space industry in 2019 for new space startups. But that said, there is a considerable amount of debt financing in the space industry. Mostly, though, it comes in the way of corporate secured debt or loans from export credit agencies. This is likely because asset-based financing and other financial instruments haven't been tested in the space industry. It also has to do with particularities in the space industry. Specifically in regard to newer ventures, space companies are different from traditional startups. They require more capital upfront in early stages for product development and for launch costs. And unlike other industries, break-even cash flows come in much later stages of development. This likely is why most likely capital to date has come from seed and venture financing. However, as intimated earlier in discussing small satellites and particularly LEO constellations, this paradigm is shifting. Small satellites are moving the industry towards lower startup costs and early stage cash flows. And as I said, even traditional geo operators are considering LEO geo hybrid constellations. So what we predict then is that a variety of financial structures of traditional industries are poised to migrate into the space industry. And this creates new opportunities for the financial sector. Everything from asset-based lending to merchant and commercial banking to trade finance, which then can lead to things like a secondary paper market and a securitization market. In the near term, though, as I said, I think what we need is a proof of concept. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Nate to discuss some of the interesting ideas that he's come up with.
All right, can you guys see my screen? Great. So Charles, thank you for doing the introduction, talking about kind of the meta frame of what we're looking to do here. So I'm going to talk a little more granularly about specific applications and some specific credit structures that we are contemplating.
Sorry to interrupt you. Your screen went dark, just a heads up. And maybe you could try reconnecting.
All right. There, is that better?
Better, we're back. Thank you.
I think my PowerPoint's being a little funny, but let's see if we can't make it work. All right. So I just have a slide up here to define private credit for just non-finance people. All this really means private credit is basically just non-bank lending where debt is not publicly traded on public markets. And there's all different types of non-bank or private credit. The structure we're contemplating would be like a private credit debt fund. It can be a syndication platform. But again, all it really means is a loan that's not coming from a bank or from bond market or some other public structure. So to that end, let's talk about some specific applications that we think are really interesting. The first one would be an ABL loan. ABL stands for just asset-based loan, and the general gist of that is a loan that's secured by an asset itself, or solely secured by an asset itself that's not, doesn't have any guarantees or other collateral beyond that. And so when you think about an asset-based loan structure, what you're really looking for is the cash flow generation of that particular asset to be sufficient to pay back to make the loan payment. So, and a good example of that might be a commercial property, like in a park building. It generates a certain amount of income. You underwrite your potential loan relative to that, and the income produced services the debt. So in this case, we're thinking of a single ABL loan secured by a single flexible use geosat. These geosats are pretty big assets. The cost obviously ranges wildly depending on the application, but what we looked at here was say something that costs about $750 million. They're pretty large, but they have a long useful life. So typically that's 15 to 20 years. And as Charles mentioned, orbital servicing is really coming online now, which very likely could extend that well beyond that. So if we're thinking about, I mentioned flexibility here, because the flexibility is really important from a lending perspective, because we want to know that if the borrower defaults on our loan and we have to take control of the collateral, we can do something with it. And to us, doing something with it would almost certainly mean reselling it. So we want to know that there's flexibility in its structure and architecture so that it can be repurposed and we get paid back. And as many of you in the space industry know, flexible use geosats are relatively new, but are becoming more common out in geo. And so we think that's going to be a interesting near-term potential application. And so what we have here is just very high level, credit profile, what that type of loan might look like. And I'm not going to, just go digging through all these numbers for you guys. There's a lot of general assumptions here about something might be structured, but the gist of it is, or the real takeaways would be, we would probably look at doing a loan that is some term less than the expected useful life for kind of obvious reasons. So in this case, this would be a 10-year loan on an asset that we presume would last for 15 years. And the big takeaway from this is that these assets are very expensive. They cost a lot of money to build, construct, and to put into service. And all of that money that was invested in that asset, the way to think about that is equity that is kind of trapped in orbit that the company that's operating them can't really access once it's in place. But a loan structure like this is a great way for them to put a loan on it, get some of that equity back out in hand to put to use to other productive uses, like maybe building another satellite or doing R&D or whatever the company wants to do. So it'd be a great way of unlocking those large amounts of dollars that are basically circling the earth that they can't access. So that's potential structure number one. The next one I want to talk about is one that I think we're really the most excited about, and that is the concept of a revolving line of credit for LEO constellation operators. And as Charles mentioned, mega constellations in LEO are growing rapidly. You've got a bunch up in operation right now that are generating cash flows. Spire, Planet, etc. Starlink is being launched literally as we speak. I don't know how many they have up now, I think, but it's something like 3,000 or close to that. And they're I say low number target of total satellites is 12,000, but we know they either have been applying or have already been approved for an FCC license up to, I think, something like 40,000. So these are pretty massive constellations. But LEO is really unique compared to GEO in that, one, as Charles talked about, that Spire, Lemur, Nanosat, these satellites are relatively small individually, relatively inexpensive. And in most cases, the individual satellites don't actually have their own propulsion system because the economics just don't justify it. And so because you're in LEO, you're closer to the Earth, gravity is obviously much higher, and you also actually have some level of atmospheric drag. And so what that means is that these satellites individually typically have a useful life of only about 3 to 5 years, and then they just deorbit and burn up. So that means the LEO operator, just to maintain the constellation, is relaunching something like 20 to 30% of the total number of satellites in the constellation every year, just to keep the asset in service. And from a credit perspective, I look at that and say, well, that is a highly predictable capital, annual capital expense, just to maintain the use of the asset. And the asset, and when I say asset, I'm presuming that the entire constellation is one asset. This asset is producing income, producing cash flows. And through the research project that Charles and I did, what we discovered was that all the LEO operators that we spoke to several of them, at that time, they were financing that activity by just issuing new stock, which is terribly capital efficient. When I heard that, it's a finance guy, kind of blew my mind. And that's also one of the reasons why so many of these companies went through SPACs last year, because that was just a near-term opportunity for them to raise a little pot of gold to continue to fund these operations as they grow their constellations. The challenge with the SPAC is that it's a one-time event. You get one slug of money. Once you burn through that, you're done. And then you also have all the regulatory burden of dealing with being a public company, which my expectation is that probably in a few years we'll see a bunch of these guys go from being public back to being private once they've consumed all that capital and get tired of dealing with the public markets. So, and for me as a credit guy, I look at this scenario. I have an asset in service that is quite valuable. It's quite expensive to put in place. So there's a lot of equity, in that asset. It's generating cash flows, and it has a very predictable annual capex to maintain itself. In any other industry, you would finance that activity through some type of credit structure. But in space, as we know today, no one is providing that. So we think this is a great fit for a new credit vehicle like what we're contemplating to come into the market. And the way it work would be really simple. A credit revolver is basically a credit card. The only difference is that this facility would be secured by the entire constellation as one asset. So it's a secure credit line. And as the operator does these annual launches to maintain the constellation, they draw down the revolver, and then the cash flows that are produced by the constellation itself would just repay, pay that balance down over time, and you just go up and down as you utilize and pay off the line. So pretty straightforward. We looked at a couple sample credit scenarios, just like the GeoSat scenario, and just some key assumptions that throw out here that we looked at for both. We assumed that each individual satellite cost about $250,000. That cost, I think, is actually probably coming down pretty quickly. That's a good assumption. We also assumed that it costs about $30 million per launch, and that you can launch about 60 per time, which is what Starlink is basically doing now. I think they're launching something like 40 to 60 each time they do that. So the first potential scenario we looked at would be an operator like Aspire. They have 143 satellites already in service, they're already producing revenues. And some of these assumptions are based off the information that was in their SPAC package that they put out to the public last year before they executed the SPAC. So in that we were looking at, I think, about a 41% projected operating margin. And I'm not going to just talk all the numbers, but the takeaway from this is that the key things I want to point you to are primarily the potential use of the credit revolver, the maximum loan to value that would represent relative to the value of the asset, which is only 50%, which is a great leverage position. And then most importantly is the projected debt service coverage ratio. And all that's really saying is that the asset, based on this credit scenario and these loan assumptions, the asset itself is going to easily generate enough cash flow to cover the cost of service of debt 4 times over, which as a credit guy, that is phenomenal debt coverage and is a great credit scenario. So I would look at this and say, this is a good loan. So if we're looking into space loans, this would be very interesting to us. The next scenario we looked at was very similar, but we just Starlink. Again, a lot of assumptions in here. All of the assumptions here are kind of based on all the public information that we can find, including their 61% projected operating margin, which is quite healthy, but I think also makes sense because that's basically the same as what Iridium's been achieving for quite some time. So same thing. Things to look at are the anticipated maximum leverage. In this case, is 44%. Very good from a credit perspective. And debt coverage ratio of 2.1, which, again, from a credit perspective, very good. In addition to the fact that you have the asset itself as actual collateral. So just 2 examples of scenarios that you could basically fund today if there's someone else in the market actively doing this, where the case for credit would make a lot of sense. So, and we think about going forward as the industry matures and the credit markets around space matures, there's going to be more things you can provide financing for. These are just some potential other applications. Looking at, the FCC has talked about requiring orbital debris bonds for people putting the new assets into service. There's certainly ways of financing that expense. If we think about orbital servicing coming online, you're going to have a lot of assets in space that are operating. So fleet finance would be an interesting opportunity. There's fuel depots going up. I think Orbit Fab already has an asset in space. So you think about those fuel depot financing, but there's also probably some opportunities for financing service contracts, along with a bunch of other potential applications, again, as the industry matures. So just to wrap all that up, the meta story is the industry is growing very rapidly, as we all know. And I don't know who said this. I'm trying to figure it out, but someone said something like space before Starship will be like westward expansion before the railroad, and which I think is quite accurate and probably really helps you contextualize. It's been growing fast, but we haven't seen anything yet. So Starships in commercial operation, the rate of growth is going to be just dramatic. And to achieve that growth, you're not going to be able to finance all that. You need to have access to credit. And that happening is also happening at the same time, whereas as Charles talked about, the industry, the individual assets themselves are becoming more standardized, more flexible, which from a lending perspective means more fungible, which is really important. Again, as a lender, that means if someone defaults on a loan and I have to figure out what to do with that thing, I have options. If I try to put a loan in something like that example of the super bespoke military weather satellite, there's no market for that. So if the borrower defaults, I can't do anything with that. Whereas if I'm talking about a Spire constellation or Starlink, there's probably a lot of interesting options you could do with those assets if you were in that position. So those 2 forces are kind of converging at the same time, which from our perspective means that it's really the time for these more traditional credit structures from really every other industry to start being applied to the space industry. And to that end, we have a team, beyond Charles and myself, we are actually actively developing a credit platform. So if anyone wants to talk to us more about that, you can feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to discuss it. And as Meredith and Charles mentioned, Charles and I wrote a pretty significant white paper around this concept that we are releasing today through the foundation. Tim was kind enough to write the forward for it, which we very much appreciate. And I'm going to put a link to it in the chat here. So if anyone would like to download it, feel free. And then also, if you'd like to reach out to Charles and myself to just talk about this anymore, or if you're a space operator, you're putting a space company together and you'd like to discuss the actual potential, the possibility of doing some kind of financing, we would love to talk to you. So I think with that, we can go into Q&A.
Yes, thank you guys. That was wonderful. Charles, Nathan, appreciate that. Very interesting. I think it's things we don't typically think about. And we look at where the economy is and we look at where our spending is and our funding is going. And so I have a great question that's coming in for you guys. Then we'll probably have to get final thoughts and move on to our next speaker. But the question that came in was, and I think this is a very good point, are there funds and corporations that would allow non-rich people to invest in space? Is anybody making money in space today that's not a SpaceX or a NanoRax, or is this right now just these big corporations and millionaires that are making this money in space?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to that a little bit, and I think Charles might have some stuff to add as well. But new space there is a very wide and robust startup economy in space right now. So you hear all these big companies like Starlink in the news, and clearly they're doing a lot of interesting and important things. But there is a very dynamic ecosystem around startups in space. And so, if you have an idea for a space startup or something you think is worth implementing, I would strongly encourage you to try and put something together, because there is a lot of activity on that front.
The only thing I'd add to that is that there are other initiatives to create fractionalized ownership of space assets through blockchain technologies, and so there might be much lower price points for folks to invest in the near future.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And then another good thing to mention is, Space Ventures, which is part of Brian Arsenault, if you're familiar with him, is Gravity Ecosystem. They have a crowdfunding angel investing platform that they've launched where they're helping to fund space startups. So that could be potential source of financing for a startup. And also, if you just want some investment exposure to space at a smaller scale, that would be a great way to do it.
Awesome. One more quick question, and then we'll wrap up this session. This one's for Nathan. And have you looked at financing private commercial space stations, build and resupply operations like Orbital Reef, Blue Origin, and Sierra Space?
Yeah, so we are definitely interested in that. What I would say to that is that's probably something that comes a little further down the pipe. And the reason for that, I mean, we're looking at developing a comprehensive credit ecosystem for the space industry, which would cover a whole lot of different applications. But the reason I talked today about these very specific applications around ABL financing is because that's probably a great entry point to start bringing credit to the industry, because we have assets that are already in service. You're not taking launch risks. They're producing cash flows today. So that's a much easier credit structure to underwrite, to take to market. But it's a great question, because ultimately we want to get there. And something like that, I see no different from kind of the commercial real estate industry, in that you have, lenders you go to for constructing new assets, and then you have lenders you go to for putting term debt on stabilized assets. And a space station to me, is just a big real estate asset in orbit. So you could look at doing something similar. I think you're muted, Meredith.
Here we go. you have to get back. It's like click and pause. But thank you, Nathan and Charles, so much. Again, if you want to go into the chat and ask questions, please do so. Also, there's a copy of that paper in there from Nathan. So check it out. Let's share it with our friends and our colleagues, as we call this Conversations for the Future, by helping each other out, by networking, by connecting people that might be interested about what you hear today. That all starts a new conversation. And so Nathan Wiggum and Charles Stotler, thank you guys so much. And we're going to get to our next session. And again, if you have any questions, you can find everyone on LinkedIn. So continue this conversation afterwards. And that wraps up that session. All right, well, this next one, I have my notes here, because thankfully everyone put together a nice little timeline for me so we can stay on track the best. We're actually going to be hearing next from Shay Berman. So he's founder and president of 4Time Inc., 5,000 ranking, a great place to work certified, and Entrepreneur 360 honored marketing agency. Success and growth are two concepts that are not foreign to digital resources, Shay Berman. Since opening Digital Resources just 7 years ago, Shay has created a team of over 100 marketing specialists with his approachable leadership style and commitment to developing young professionals into elite career builders. Now he's the founder and president of Digital Resource. He's been honored in the 2020 American Marketing Association's 4 Under 40 Emerging Leadership, South Florida Business Journal's 4 Under 40 Entrepreneurship, and South Florida Business and Wealth's Up and Comer Awards. Shay's been an active figure in the industry. He shares his knowledge through his involvement as a contributor to publications such as Inc. Entrepreneur and Forbes, and is a board member on Palm Beach Atlantic University's Titus Center for Franchising. Shay prides himself on the business model, which emphasizes educating business owners and young entrepreneurs on how to take control of their destinies. These are the same concepts he used to lead his team of more than 100 marketing specialists. And Shay believes that a leader is only as strong as their team, which I can 100% agree with, as he strives for constant professional and personal development for his agency and its stakeholders. So unfortunately, Shay cannot be here today, but we are so thankful that he made time ahead of time to sit down and do an interview with Tim. And so I'm going to play that for you now. So enjoy this exciting interview with Shay.
All righty. We are joined here today by Shay Berman. Shay is the founder and president of Digital Resource, a 4-time Inc. 5000 ranked digital marketing agency located in West Palm Beach, Florida. Shay's dynamic and clear-cut approach to internet marketing has earned him a ton of local and national recognition, including the 2020 American Marketing Association's 4 Under 40 Emerging Leadership, the South Florida Business Journal's, 4 Under 40. You notice the trend here in entrepreneurship, and South Florida Business and Wealth's Up and Comer Awards. So based on all these awards, it's clear to me, Shay, that not only are you under 40, but you are going somewhere.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, so great to have you here and hear more about, Digital Resource as a firm, and also about how is it that you approach workforce and development and managing a workforce and that sort of thing. So I'll turn the screen over to you and take it away.
Sounds great. Well, I've got a small presentation for us today to kind of talk through who we are as a company, how we take our workforce very seriously, what we've identified in the market, and how we can continue to develop us, and how other companies can take what we've learned and get ahead with it, because it was not easy figuring all these things out. So a quick thing about me, again, my name is Shay. I'm the president of Digital Resource. We're a 100+ person marketing company out of West Palm Beach, Florida. I started Digital Resource just about 8 years ago, and it was just me. So going from 0 to 100, literally, in 8 years has been a wild ride, to say the least. And especially through the ever-evolving times of COVID and hybrid and remotes and salaries and resignations, there's a lot going on in the workforce right now, and staying abreast of all of it's so important. So today I want to kind of share with you a little bit about what we've gone through, what we've learned, and hopefully you guys can take that and use it for yourselves. So as mentioned, we have 100+ team members, and they're all very specialized. We have account managers, live chat people, content, SEO, digital ads, you name it, we have a specialist that does it. And managing so many different team members comes with a wide set of personalities, growth goals, skill sets, ages, generations. It's just so crazy what we experience at Digital Resource when it comes to all the different people that we work with. But we recognize that these 4 skills, or these 4 things that we have up on the screen, purpose, skill development, skill-based opportunity, shared culture, are what our team has been the most hungry for, especially over the last 1 to 2 years. And when we recognized that our team members were looking for these opportunities in their career growth goals, we decided to go into a hybrid model. So I've been very against anything but working in the office for a very long time. And I love collaboration. Like I love seeing people. I truly believe you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. I believe that new team members can get better ingrained in the culture and how things are done by being next to someone. And I was always just about that. But when we realized that the workforce was pushing us to go at least hybrid, if not remote, we had to adapt, or we weren't going to retain the people that we needed to be successful. So we did go hybrid. We have a system now where every team member is in the office at least 2 to 3 days a week, and then work from home the other part of the week that obviously they're not in office. And with that said, we have put forth a remote first mentality. So what does that mean? We used to have in-person meetings where you would Zoom in if you weren't there. Today, we have Zoom meetings, and if you're there in person, that's a plus. We used to have whiteboard sessions where we write on the whiteboard in the office, and if you weren't there, you'd miss out on that collaboration. Today, we use digital whiteboards to collaborate with our remote team, and if you happen to be in person during that meeting, you can visualize that in person. So it's a remote first culture that we had to put forth in order to prioritize people having purposeful careers, developing their skills, having the shared culture and the skill-based opportunities that they're looking for, because none of these things can come together if they aren't in our company. If they're leaving out the back door, we're never going to get there. So the hybrid work model is what we had to adopt to ensure that we could even have the chance to implement these things that people are looking for. So we have kind of a roadmap to success when it comes to career development at Digital Resource. Number one is an assessment. Every team member is assessed on what they enjoy, what they don't like, where they want to go in the company, where they want to go in their careers, even what their family makeup is like and what goals they have in their personal lives. We have to assess who they are, each as individuals, also as a team, and also ourselves as a company. From there, step 2, exploration. We have many different departments, as I mentioned, and our goal is to explore where we can give them opportunities. Maybe an account manager or project manager wants to learn more about how to run digital ads. Maybe a digital ads person wants some experience on doing live chat or looking at integrations on how things work together or data analysis. And so we have to explore as leadership where we can take the assessment and then find the opportunities. From there, you can find all the opportunities that are there, but you have to prepare for them. So it takes collaborating with other managers and other departments to understand why this individual deserves to have some outside opportunity, what it means for the company, and how we can implement a system that's going to be trackable and create a good roadmap for their success. Because if we just say, hey, account manager, project manager, let's throw you into digital ads and see how you do, that's not going to work. What things in digital ads do they want to know? And how can we support them through learning and growing that career? And I know I'm using very specific terms to a marketing agency, but this can be used in any company, assessing what departments they're in, or they're client-facing, not client-facing, are they data or creative. But that assessment and exploring where you can get those opportunities and preparing to roll them out to these people is what's crucial. Obviously, implementation, everyone's got to have buy-in, be willing to put forth the effort to give the careers or the training and the tools that these people need. They have to be willing and be bought in. And then, of course, decision-making. When you make decisions for your people, you are doing them a disservice. You have to be having people make decisions about their careers and then assisting them in getting in that direction. Because as soon as you start making decisions for other people, they start becoming disengaged and disinterested. And that's why, yes, you can have this whole roadmap, but if you mapped it out without the buy-in of the person that you're leading, it's going to fall apart completely. Now, we hire for soft skills. I think a lot of companies are saying this today, especially over the last few years. Like, we can train anyone on almost anything, but we can't train people to be empathetic, caring, understanding individuals, be team players, speak very well, write very well. So these soft skills that people have are our baseline for hiring. And we think that all companies out there should be hiring for these skills and training people into it. And we find that it creates 4 different types of team members: the thinkers, the builders, the improvers, and the producers, as you can see on my screen. And with that said, while each person that we hire for soft skills can fall into one of these 4 areas, there's still so much that comes with that. So we bring on top tier talent in a lot of cases, but we also bring on young people who we want to grow up through our farm system, from a junior to a mid-level to a senior. And by understanding what type of person they are, thinker, builder, improver, producer, understanding where in their skill level they are, we can then put them right into the right department, the right system, and give them the right training to continue their career growth and development. But it's about hiring the right people first. And as a company, we have a set of philosophies that we live by. I think we're at like 23 or 24 philosophies, from there's always a way to a penny saved is a penny. I can go on and on. But these philosophies aren't important, not just to say you have them, to put them on your walls or put them on your website, but because it truly shapes the culture of the people that surround you. But let's go back to the why. Why do we want to shape culture? Why do we want to understand our team members? Why do we want to give them career development? Why do we want them staying on longer? Well, while I think it's obvious to a lot of companies, it's not. Team members that are happy to produce better work. Team members that stay longer create less churn and therefore save money to the company. You create better relationships with your clients in a lot of cases, that those relationships could be built up over months or years. Ultimately, happier team members, longer standing team members, and team members that are so hungry to grow in today's day and age when it comes to skill set, responsibility, pay, whatever it may be, and identifying those things will help any company's bottom line and will help the culture. So again, back to these philosophies should shape your every single action. You should be using the philosophies that you create in your company to shape the conversations you have, the career development goals, how you talk to each other, and even what you use to talk to each other. Do you speak in person? Do you do it over Slack? Do you do it through email? Your philosophy should guide you at all times. So it's so important you have this great baseline. And when establishing your company culture and trying to attain top talent, we're always asking these questions. What is your why? What does your company strive for? How do you express gratitude? What are you doing to build your team? And as we're asking us these questions, we're asking them now, we're asking them tomorrow, the next day, next week, next month. We are continuously asking these. The second that your team members think you stop asking these questions is the second they may become disengaged. And that disengagement of team members can, I don't want to say be a poison, but can spread very quickly. And so you want to let them know at all times that you're there for them and their career development, that you're listening to them, and create a community and a place where they can speak up and speak out and talk about how they're feeling, maybe as an individual or maybe as a department. The more they can speak up and speak out, and the more opportunity you listen and agree to hearing them out, the better that department and the better those team members will become. And that's what we find in our company. We allow our team members to speak up whenever. They can call a one-on-one, they can have a group meeting, and we take every single piece of advice that we're given, every recommendation that's brought up, very seriously. And while we don't implement everything, our team members are very appreciative that we are willing to listen and hear them out at all times. And I think that just that alone lets them know that they're in control of their careers. Because there's so many companies out there that it is the way it is, we're never going to change. And that lack of control is a lack of control in their ultimate roadmap and destiny. So giving that control back in the form of just listening a lot of times, not even always implementing, is a very, very powerful tool. And asking these questions can help you create that roadmap for your company. Ongoing education. So I love this. Now I have a dream, and that dream is to give 80% of my company's time to doing client work and what our company does day to day, and 20% of our time to ongoing education, whether it's getting new skills, getting new tools implemented, just learning from your mistakes, whatever it may be, self-improvement on the individual, on the team, on the company. Now, does that always happen? No, but it's a great perfect world scenario that I strive for. So we have 4 pieces of ongoing education in our company right now. Number 1 is Tranual. It's an amazing software. It has allowed us to build out all of our processes, from onboarding a new team member, whether they're a junior, a mid-level, or a senior in any department, to onboarding interns and giving them literally a roadmap and a tool. Hey, follow this for the next few days. And when you're done, you're going to be a fully set up intern being able to accomplish tasks and learn within the company, just like a regular team member. And we have a Tranual for every single department at every single skill level. Same for interns. I would highly look into using a tool like this to make sure your processes are on paper and make sure that anyone can follow it and get brought on board very quickly. Now, the biggest thing with it is, as your processes change, and ours do daily sometimes, making sure that your Tranual is up to date. Because if it's not, it will very quickly become obsolete and you won't be using it anymore, and all that time will be wasted. We also have DR Classrooms. DR Classrooms is a once a month classroom that all of our management team gives on a one-by-one basis. So we have 13 departments, that's 13 DR Classrooms. They have to give one every month, and it's on their given topic. So if we have a content manager, that content manager is giving a classroom on how to do better creative writing. Or our ads manager will be giving a classroom on how to make the best creative and A/B test their ads. It's always some very specialized topic within the company that any team member in any department can sign up for, take time out of their day, and go and sign up for the classroom to learn. So again, trying to give back during business hours and allow them to cross-train and get more out of their careers. Cert Club is an after-hours thing. They get to stick around the office, have some fun, have some food, have some drinks sometimes, and get to educate themselves and get new certifications in a group setting. So while it is after hours, we support it inside the office, and it's a whole bunch of people together with a shared interest of growing their resume by getting certifications they might not otherwise just get on their own. Everyone's kind of pushing for a better, each one of themselves in a collective group. And then we have leadership training. So our leadership training comes from an outside source. We don't know what we don't know. So we like to bring in other trainers that could be perspectives that we don't have the perspective on to help our managers be better managers, help our leaders become more understanding of how to grow, especially in a rapidly growing company like ours. So these are the 4 things that we do to keep that ongoing education. And our team members tell us that it's things like this that keep them attracted to our company, because it shows that we care about their continued growth and skill set growth. And with that being one of the 4 pillars of what team members are looking for today, the workforce is looking for, it's crucial that we continue to provide this. And I could probably have to say, we could probably do a lot more still. So that's a lot about how we do things at Digital Resource. And I can go on and on to some more intricacies, but ultimately the workforce today isn't just about money. They're not just about title. They're not about the promotion. They're not about what's next. They literally want to be able to educate themselves further. They want opportunities to learn. They want to be heard. They want to be in control of their careers and their destinies. And by doing some of the things that I mentioned today, we've been able to lock in our workforce, make them happy, and allow them to be better leaders and create leaders under them, which has allowed us to be one of the fastest growing companies in America, 4 years, soon to be 5 years in a row.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, and there's so many lessons just about any company can pull from that. I know a lot of the viewers here in or adjacent to the space sector, and so often people inside the community have this knee-jerk reaction to hearing soft skills for a starter, and this idea that anybody can be taught to do it. However, you're exactly right that increasingly as we're talking with hiring managers, talking with other managers at these rocket companies, other space companies, they're saying, look, I just need a welder. I'll teach them from there. I just need, you give me someone that has those basic skills, that is motivated, that can has a good work ethic, we'll take it from there.
Yeah.
And it's amazing because that's not necessarily what we're taught growing up. We're taught growing up, you build this long resume of skills and then you can do something. But increasingly it is, how are you at all the stuff around it?
It's funny you say that, because I can see how what you just said was similar to what I was referring to, but also different. Like, we're talking in our business, like soft skills, being able to translate into teaching anyone anything. And obviously in like the rocket business, you have to have some type of skill level, but it seems that from what you said, you can be a basic welder and be taught to be an amazing welder. And in the past, you had to grow through the ranks to get there. And today it's like, you can just get right into working in NASA, and maybe not NASA, but a similar spot, just because you have a skill that they believe in you, that they can train you up to be something better.
No, exactly. And, in marketing, a hard skill in marketing, there's no doubt a list of them that in 1950s, when you were on Mad Men, that, soft skills was anybody in the secretary pool.
Yeah.
And, that's evolved from there. And in the space sector, soft skills are a little different. I'm a political science guy, so it all looks like hard skills to me. But you tell me to do content and I'm like, I got this. Tell me to weld and I'm like, oh God. But no, I thought it was, another piece that you talked about that I thought had broad applicability is this remote first idea that a lot of companies, especially manufacturing heavy ones, the idea is, well, we can never go fully remote. So we have to do in person. And that's fair. Some pieces, you can't make it home. But having that mindset of, well, if we make it remote first, that's, benefits everybody who can work remotely.
Yeah.
What struggles did you have transitioning to that?
Number one was trust, trusting that the team members that were remote that you couldn't see were going to be working was first hurdle as a CEO I had to get over. Number two was organization, because when you rely on turning your chair around and asking someone a question instead of putting it into your project management software, you put those two people separated and all of a sudden that falls apart. So we had the process in place where that shouldn't be done, but it's those micro conversations that allow you to kind of be efficient in some ways, kind of tear down that efficiency overnight when you go remote. So it's really sticking to your processes that and not cutting corners, even though cutting corners in person can sometimes benefit the system. When you're remote, cutting corners hurts the system.
Yeah. No, I think that's, it's just like on Zoom and in virtual, we can't read body language as well.
Yeah.
And so you have to be explicit, like, no, look, I'm upset at you. No, I'm happy with you. Whereas in person, we can just read it. We get it. We understand.
I know.
So I think that's a really good, yeah.
And I was going to say, we also have a situation where, yes, you can't just turn around and grab someone anymore. And because of that, you're missing on the connection between people too, and the collaboration. People are afraid to be as aggressive as pick up the phone for a 10-second conversation when you weren't worried about turning around, having a 10-second conversation before. So you're missing out on some of the micro conversations that you might be able to have very efficiently that build camaraderie and collaboration and build creativity through a company. And that's still been a struggle, but there's so many softwares out there that have helped us overcome that. It just takes adopting them and having the remote first mentality about it.
Yeah, no, it's really going to be interesting what emerges from this as the new normal.
Yeah, I keep saying that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at this point it's just normal,
right?
I keep getting weirded out that I'm gonna, I have two kids, 8 and 10, that it's just gonna be normal for them to have video classes all the time. Where when I was in school, I think I took one correspondence class and I mailed stuff in.
I know.
I mean, it was weird.
We didn't have Zoom back then.
Right, exactly. So no, thanks for being here today, Shay. Is there anything that we left out or missed that you wanted to make sure we cover?
It's a good question. I think just the biggest thing to remember is that, and we kind of finished off with this just now, is that believing in people who otherwise wouldn't get those opportunities in the past, and knowing that the workforce is so shaken up and giving people shots that you might not otherwise give those shots to, tends to be working out much better than not. And so that's my biggest recommendation.
Yeah, no, great. I've never gone wrong trusting my gut on a hire and thinking I'm going to take a risk on this person. It's always worked out.
I agree.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on. Well, thank you today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great to have you here. Take care.
All right, see you.
That was great. Wow. Very motivational. And, I think stressing that point about, taking chances on people. And I mean, that's something we can all take into our lives, whether it's personal, whether it's professional. learning more about people, not judging a book by its cover, somebody that's got passion and maybe that skill set's a little under, but they want to be there. They want to be in the room. They want that job. Very, very great. Thank you, Shay, so much. Moving on to our next speaker, I'm very excited to introduce you to Michelle Lucas. Now, talk about a story with passion. Michelle has been inspired by space her entire life. And after years of hard work in school, Michelle graduated from the university and went to work at Johnson Space Center for NASA to follow her dream. There she was part of the Payload Safety Review Panel. She worked with Mission Control for the International Space Station as a flight controller. And then after that, she went on to be a technical instructor for astronauts. Along the way, she found a passion for inspiring the next generation. So she left JSC to pursue this new trajectory. Michelle started Higher Orbits, which is a nonprofit that uses space to excite students about STEM. Girl, I feel that one. I'm excited to hear your presentation. She runs programs all over the country and the world, encouraging students to find and pursue their passion. Michelle is also honored to be an AIAA Associate Fellow. So Michelle, welcome. And we're very excited to hear how you excite students and more about your program.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Good morning. I guess it is morning for all of us still, and happy St. Patrick's Day. I had to break out a little green today. I believe in a good theme. I'm excited to get to share a bit with all of you. And I'm going to be honest, this is probably going to diverge a little bit from the others. I'm going to stay away from statistics, and I'm going to go more and yank on your heartstrings a little bit, because at the end of the day, emotion is part of what helps drive students to do whatever it is they choose to do. It was my emotion and my passion that drove me to this industry. And I can tell you, I just finished up 3 days at Hazelwood Middle School in New Albany, Indiana, working with some of your future workforce, our future STEMists and explorers. And while incredibly exciting, also emotional to some degree, of getting to see these students getting excited and trying to help them understand that the possibilities exist. And I think that is one of our biggest challenges with students and workforce in general. So I think I have one person here who was so kind to have joined us last week in the Space Tango conference. I'm going to warn you, work harder, not smarter. I ran out of time, and my slides are pretty similar. So apologies if you have seen some of this before, but there's only so many hours in the day. I believe that space inspires, and we talk a lot about inspiring students. And at the end of the day, that's the core of why I do what I do. But the other piece of that is it's workforce development. It's great to want to inspire students, and that is what motivates me every day. But the reality is, we all know we have a workforce problem in this country, and especially in our aerospace industry. So I want to challenge all of you. I'm going to put all of you on the spot here to think about some things for a moment. And I want you to take a moment and think about, if you were part of this industry, what was it about space that inspired you and brought you here? If you're not part of the aerospace industry, what moments about spaceflight have made you stop and go, oh, that's really cool, and has affected you, has inspired you? Think about that for just a second. If you want to share in the chat, I welcome that. I love that. I love to know what's inspired you. I've heard some great stories. It's actually one of my icebreakers when I meet people at conferences about, like, what was it that inspired you? We've had some incredibly inspirational moments through the history of spaceflight that have revolutionized how we look at the world. On May 5th, 1961, Alan Shepard launched to space as the first American. Obviously, big moment. July 20th, 1969, the first humans walking on the moon. At this time, this started a major STEM push and initiative to get more students studying science and math. I mean, really, at that point in time, it really was just math and science. And I tell students all the time when they're like, didn't you have STEM, Miss Michelle? I'm like, well, kind of. We had math and science. Nobody had quite packaged the term STEM yet. But in the 60s, there was a huge push for more studying of math and science with students as a result of this push for the moonshot. Let's see, I'm looking at your answers and I love it. Miss Tara Rutley, an incredible scientist, was inspired by Space Lab. Adrian is excited by the sheer and growing number and variety of people and projects. Learning more about the weather satellites, GOES, that's awesome. Things that affect our life every day. And Dwayne, Sagan, Voyager, and me, thank you, Dwayne, that is so kind of you. Lots of different things. And you notice even in this list, there's a wide variety of things. So as we look to space to inspire, there's a lot of options. Was it the first space shuttle launch, April 12th, 1981? Maybe it's planetary. I'll be honest, I am not that smart when it comes to the planetary missions, but I always want to learn more. Maybe it's Hubble's images. I mean, look at this. These are works of art. And I think that's a piece that we oftentimes forget, that there is art in science and there are elements there that are really appealing to a lot of students. I love that Garrett was inspired by the first time he met an astronaut and watched spacewalk. Inspiration is as different as every human on the planet. Maybe it was a book you read or a TV show or a movie. I thought it was a wonderful thing when about 2 weeks ago, I had astronaut Wendy Lawrence come to Midland schools with me. And she talks about what inspired her. And she remembers the early days. Her father, Admiral Lawrence, flew with Alan Shepard. Wendy remembers watching the first humans walk on the moon. But what really inspired her at the time was Star Trek also. And some of you may be surprised to hear that an astronaut who studied engineering was inspired first largely by Star Trek, but there's something really important about this photo here and that show in general. You'll notice it shows a diverse crew with different backgrounds. They looked different. They had different skill sets. And even though Wendy did not see someone who looked like her flying into space in real life yet, she saw Star Trek and believed in this as a beautiful future of different people, different backgrounds, different upbringings, and that inspired her. These are all things that we need to take into consideration when we're looking at our future workforce of how do we bring them in? How do we drive them? How do we get them excited? We've had a lot of exciting things happen recently. We've got Bob and Doug going to space on SpaceX and numerous crews afterwards. I mean, come on, Bob and Doug, it's really, it just sounds like a TV show that's, made for entertainment. The first Blue Origin flights with humans, first Virgin Galactic flights. I suspect there is a space moment that many of you remember. And whether it's positive or a really scary moment, it's one of those things that you may never forget. You may remember exactly where you're at. Space can inspire so many people. I like to say whether you're 8 or 88, space is a way to get people excited. My grandfather, who passed a couple of years ago at 95, in his early 90s, we got him a computer. He loved it. He loved to look up new things. And I would get these messages of, hey, honey, did you hear about this mission that's happening? Can you tell me more about it? I want to know, wait, we're going to go study Pluto? How long does it take to get there? How does that work? How did they build that? At 90, he was still inspired by space. Little kids inspired by space. So it's a great platform to inspire so many. Another anecdotal that I love to share, when the Blue Origin first human flight launched, I was going to run one of our programs, or I was running one of our programs in Illinois that I'll tell you a little bit more about. And I was so excited. I was so emotional for a variety of reasons, including I love Wally Funk and she is a friend. And I was thrilled that she was finally going to get her opportunity to fly into space. And my aunt, who lives in Northwest Indiana, messaged my mom, and her words, and I'm paraphrasing, but I'm getting it mostly right, was that she felt like the kid that she was watching the first humans walk on the moon, because she realized this was a transitional time. This was something very new. This was suddenly not just people with masters and PhDs go to space. This was an opening of a doorway to space, and it inspired her. So how do we leverage that? How do we use that? I will tell you my story since you have shared with me yours of what has inspired you. I was inspired by the first space shuttle flight. Now, I will tell you, I am the first in my family to go to college. Nobody knew what to do with the little girl from the south side of Chicago who said, I want to be an astronaut. I want to work in space. They looked at me and patted me on the head a little bit like, oh, that's so adorable. What do we do with that? And that could have gone really badly if I'm really honest about it. I didn't have a support structure other than my mother, who is the most amazing human on the planet, as far as I'm concerned. I didn't have a support structure to tell me, yes, you can do it. And here are the opportunities and the possibilities. I was lucky that I just I had the drive, I had the chutzpah, if you will. I wanted to do this. And lo and behold, whatever it took, I was going to. But not all students are going to have that drive. So how do we inspire them and keep them inspired? For me, I was fortunate. I got to go to space camp on a scholarship. I certainly couldn't have afforded it otherwise. It was a great way to keep honing that passion for me. Went and studied at Purdue University and Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, did some undergraduate research on the Vomit Comet. And all those roads led me to the International Space Station. Not personally flying there. I would love to. They're welcome to send me up anytime if they would be so inclined. But there I worked in mission control, as was mentioned, and I was a technical instructor for astronauts. I am super excited that Mike Lopez Alegria will be flying early next month back to the space station on the Axiom 1 flight. I was one of his lead instructors. And I will tell you that every day I had a moment of inspiration in some way while I was there. I will also tell you that I had days that I was as frustrated as everybody else of, oh, this is going wrong, or this isn't happening, and things aren't going as smoothly as possible. And the way that I found to re-inspire myself was to go talk to a student about what I did, or go talk to somebody not related to our industry about what I did. And that re-inspired me, and it shared our message of what are we doing in this industry. I had some amazing technical opportunities, loved all of my work. I got to work on underwater missions. And I bring all of this up because this all plays into some of the tools in my toolbox that I am using to help inspire students. All of these pictures don't look the same. I did a wide variety of things. And part of why I did a wide variety of things was somebody asked me if I'd be willing to. And I said, sure, why not? That was how I was raised, of just charge in, do what it takes. And so I took all of these experiences and decided to start Higher Orbits. We are a 501c3 that uses spaceflight to engage students in science, technology, engineering, and math while building teamwork, leadership, and communication skills. What Shay said about soft skills really resonates with me. I think that it is not enough to be the smartest about your topic. You have to be able to convey it. We have to be able to communicate. We all have to be able to work in teams. And so that becomes a core component of what we do. I want to show you a little video. Now, our organization, we are small, we are nimble, and we also are very, shall I say, we're specialized. We do what we do, and we love what we do. And I'll show you why we love what we do. Actually, let me just hit play. Let me just quit talking for a second here.
We don't have any sound. Is there supposed to be sound, Michelle? There's a little box you have to check to be able to play the sound through. Maybe that.
Oh, are you not getting the sound?
No.
No. Okay.
Yeah, sometimes
Sure.
if you go in, it's that I've done this 100 times. There's a little checkbox. If you don't check it, you'll share the video, but not the sound. So that probably is it.
Interesting, because when I
Fingers
did it
crossed.
last week, it shared the sound. I'll tell you what, I will drop you all a link to go watch this video. This video shows you some of our students learning that their experiment's going to fly into space. And it's a video that gives me the goosebumps, no matter if I have seen it 100 plus times. I get the goosebumps every time. There are two things kids get excited about: space and dinosaurs. I know nothing about dinosaurs. I have a couple astronauts who will joke that they consider themselves dinosaurs, and I can't help but get a good chuckle out of that. Space is what I know, and so it's what I've chosen to share with students. I'm known for saying I am not trying to turn every kid into a rocket scientist, but space is a great way to get kids to think bigger, dream bigger, and keep open doors of opportunity that exist so long as they keep doors of opportunity open with STEM. Now, I've heard so many great comments through these conversations already, and I want to help frame this conversation a little bit here of we run Go for Launch. Now, there are a whole lot of amazing programs out there, and we love to be able to support others. I'm thrilled to be able to support Foundations for the Future. We all win together. And so what we like to bring to the table is this piece of what we call Go for Launch. It is a multi-day STEM event where students get to work with an astronaut for the entire event. So I've challenged you to think about what was your Space Inspires moment. Think about the first time you met an astronaut. Look, I don't care if you were 5 or 45 or 65. Almost everybody gets excited when they get to meet an astronaut. I was just in New Albany, as I mentioned, and I watched a couple of adults kind of lose their stuff, all excited that they got to sit and have a beverage and dinner with an astronaut and ask all the questions they could want. And it's really funny to me because inevitably you have an adult who's like, okay, I know I shouldn't ask this, but how do you go to the bathroom in space? And I always laugh because whether you were a kid or an adult, we have that same inquisitive nature. With kids, we just haven't quite stomped it out as much as we do with adults. They haven't been told no. So with this program, they get to work with an astronaut for the entire event, as well as other space and STEM professionals. Here's the thing. The average student thinks they know what an engineer does, or what a STEMist is, or what a scientist is. And they think there are these like 4 jobs to work in the space industry. And by 4 jobs, I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, but they don't quite understand that the jobs aren't this many and this deep. They're really this many and this deep. And there are so many possibilities that exist. So that's one of the things that we work really hard to do, is to show students different opportunities that exist. We make them practice communication, teamwork, and leadership from the moment they walk in the door. You should see the looks when I'm like, oh, okay, great. We're 12 minutes in, and now all of you are going to stand up and all of you are going to talk. And they're like, no, I don't want to. And yet, by the end of even just 2 or 3 days, by empowering students and putting them in a safe space where they feel accepted by everyone around them, suddenly their communication skills, those soft skills, they're opening up to them. And we can see a marked difference in just 2 days. Now, every team ultimately has to design an experiment that can fit inside a 1U cube. It's a 10 centimeter cube that they'd like to see tested in space. Now, I had to laugh as there was an article. Obviously, we all know what's going on in the world of Russia and the Ukraine, and there's been issues with the space station. There's some tensions, I should say. I had to laugh. This photo was used as one of the article photos, and I was like, oh, I don't know that I really want this as the article photo with that. But this was our first experiment on orbit back in 2017 with Mark Vande Hei, who just broke the American spaceflight record. And this was just the first of 13. We've had a wide variety of student-led space-flown research flown into space, and everyone starts to think, oh, okay, so this is just for kids who really get science. They really get the tech. They really understand the things. And I'm just going to flip through these slides because you can look at them while I chat. Here's the thing. We package this in a way that we are never solving the rocket equation. We are never doing hardcore coding. We are always keeping it high level and packaging it in such a way that the STEM rock star gets that elevated STEM experience, as well as the leadership, teamwork, and communication. But the kid who's like, yeah, okay, science sucks, whatever, but an astronaut's cool. I'll come hang out for a couple of days with an astronaut. It's making it approachable. It's making it palatable. What we try and do with this program is fill those gaps. There are a lot of amazing programs out there, and I am all for all of them. Rocketry Challenge, coding. The gap that we're missing in a lot of ways with our workforce development is the kids who aren't sure, who don't know for sure that they can do this, who are concerned that maybe they're not smart enough or their math skills aren't enough. So how do we meet them where they are? You can help that. You can help that with mentorship. You can help that with sharing what you do. If kids think that everything is crunching numbers to build rockets, that's what, and they're not particularly good at that. That's where we start to lose them. Like, well, I can't do that. I can't, those equations on the board, that's way beyond my ability. I'm not capable of that. Well, let's start with, they probably are capable of that, and they just need a little help, and they need to know it's okay to ask for help. But the other piece of it is that we don't all crunch equations. Maybe it's that you're the pilot of an aircraft, or you're the technician who takes care of that spacecraft. So what you can do to help this is show them what you do. Show them what it is that your daily life looks like. Take them to professional conferences. Look, conferences, way more fun with a student. I got to tell you, take a kid, and by kid, I probably shouldn't call them kids. These are young adults, and let them be part of this. See this through their eyes. See how they see it differently from those of us who work the job every day. And sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, get bogged down with, oh, it's not going like I want it to. Take a student to a professional conference, network, help them introduce them to people, let them know people, let them meet others so they can ask them questions. These things, networking, cost you nothing. Introduce a student to somebody, introduce them to each other. Sometimes one of the biggest challenges is that these students, they don't want to be different than everybody else. And maybe they're in an environment where they feel like, oh, nobody likes me because I'm a dork and I don't fit in. Guess what? They fit in somewhere. Introduce them to each other, introduce them to other students. Dispel myths, dispel the idea that you have to be a PhD scientist, you have to have an engineering degree to work in our industry of aerospace. A lot of different opportunities that exist. Help dispel those myths. Show them you. At the end of the day, your story is powerful. How did you get where you are? Share that. There's some piece of it that may resonate with them. Sally Ride said, you can't be what you don't see. Work hard to show different humans, different backgrounds, different everything. So perhaps they see some of themselves in whomever you're sharing. And I know I just said it, but I'm going to say it again. Share your journey. It's powerful. That is one of the best ways to inspire students. And yes, I keep saying inspire students because to me, it's synonymous with develop your workforce. Kids don't get into a lot of these things because they're going to get rich. There are jobs out there that you can get rich in. Newsflash, aerospace is generally not one of those. And yes, I'm very aerospace and STEM focused in most ways. But if they're inspired, that's how they're going to want to get in. And they're going to do just fine financially, as we all know. Mentorship. And at the end of the day, I invite you to all of these things. These are things that you can do easily with very little cost. You want a workforce? Inspire them. And even if you don't think your job is the coolest thing on the planet right this second, you don't know that that student doesn't. So share it. Share your journey. Share your job. So I know we have some questions, and I definitely want to get to those. Here we go. Let me pop in here. So question, just how big is this market? How many students per year want to launch a CubeSat? Or how many such satellites might it be launched? So I don't do CubeSats. We do Cube Labs, which get carried out inside the International Space Station. CubeSats are amazing. What I have also learned is that the human element makes a big difference. The kid who's geeked out about STEM is really into a CubeSat because it goes up into space and it does cool things. The kid who's like, meh, I don't care that much, is a lot less geeked out about that. They look at that like coding or things that are a little frightening. Now you add the human element and you put it on the International Space Station, something that is very tangible to them because there are humans living on it, and it changes how they see it. That may sound like I'm splitting hairs, but I can promise you it's significant. It's something that as soon as you involve humans and you take it down to, we call it a science fair in space. Every kid has had to do scientific method at some point. And so you start talking Cube Lab, and now we're talking, way more complex. Let's go back to the basics. What is a basic fundamental question that a kiddo has about taking gravity out of the equation on something? And that's how we package it. And as such, for example, our Team Lotus that just launched their experiment on G17, we have 3 team members. One of them, total STEM rock star. She's doing pre-med at Stanford now. One of them, middle of the road, kind of liked STEM, wasn't sure. And one who was like, I got no time for STEM. I am not interested. I like to do Bob Ross paintings and crochet, and I don't like science. And yet at the end of the 2 days, she looked at me and said, okay, that was really cool. Like, I never thought I could do this. And I never thought about it in that way. So creating a way that students of different abilities can look at it is what we strive to do. We have huge demand. Our limiting factor is financing, is funding at the end of the day. If I could run this program for free for students all across the country, I could run more of these than we can handle. As far as market goes, right now, we are fortunate that we, through Space Tango and a Space Act agreement, are flying as many payloads as we get them to the International Space Station. And we're looking forward to working with partners like Orbital Reef and Starlab and Axiom in the future. So I hope that answers that. We did one in Washington State a couple of years ago. So let's see, 2018 maybe. We did one at the Museum of Flight. We'd love to go back. We are not mainly funded through grants, so I guess that's not true anymore. We got a very generous grant from Blue Origin's Hub for the Future. We are largely funded through sponsorships. We are a tiny organization. I carried the pack on my back for 5 years by myself. I run every one of these events. We have run about 55 events. I hired my first employee last spring. So thrilled to have her on board. And it's that nimbleness that keeps us to where we are running these programs for not an insignificant sum. Let's face it, space is expensive, but cheaper than people expect because we do stay pretty nimble. Grants are tough. The ROI is very, very low on a grant at the end of the day. And to spend the human power on a grant is not the best way for us to do it. Whereas me spending my time working sponsorships is more so. Our event we just ran in New Albany was a partner grant, however, with Purdue University, where we were their STEM partner. And so they wrote a grant for something else and then asked us to come in and do STEM. We welcome, look, we get creative. We welcome all sorts of things of how to fund things, including, donated donuts, because we believe in donuts at events. Astronauts love donuts, students love donuts. It's a unifying thing to get people to do what you need them to do. At the end of the day, I'm lucky to get to do what I do. And I've had a lot of people ask me, do I miss being at NASA's Johnson Space Center? There are certainly elements I do miss. I miss my colleagues. I do miss the technical to some degree. But I work hard every day to bring those elements of that part of my career in to talk with the students. And that is one of the cornerstones of our Go for Launch program. We're putting people in front of these students who have been there, done that. And that is the other powerful thing. It is that when you show students people who have done the job, not just learned about it in a book or learned about it as a solar system ambassador, which are amazing things. Don't get me wrong, they're amazing things. But when you put someone in front of a room of students who has done these jobs, it's tangible, it's attainable. So I challenge all of you to walk away from this with the concept that space inspires, and we can expand that to STEM inspires. And you're part of the solution for our workforce problem. So think about how you can use what you do to inspire one of the next generation of STEMists and explorers. I will pop our website in here. Please reach out. We welcome volunteers. We'd love for all of you to come talk about what you do with our students when we're in your area. And I thank all of you for this opportunity to diverge from perhaps your typical conversations here and share with you what we do.
It's great, Michelle. Thank you so much. That was so motivational and inspiring. As a fellow woman of STEM and space, I can totally relate to everything you're saying, because it's what we're doing now that's helping inspire our next engineers. And personally, when you talked about the math and the science, I had to laugh because I was terrible. I'm a meteorologist now, so I was able to survive. So I think the more we can motivate these kids, the more we can tell them, hey, you know what? You don't have to be an A student at everything. You can be a C student and still be the most successful person in your career. So Michelle, Lucas, thank you so much. Don't forget to post the link, and everyone connect with each other on LinkedIn. Like Michelle said, we're all about helping each other out here. You might have an idea or a story, and continue our conversation on with the person that spoke today. So the next woman actually that is speaking, I had the pleasure of meeting Janaea Griffin. I believe it was Space Symposium last year in Colorado Springs, and I was inspired by her. So I'm really happy to hear that she's part of this today. So for all of you not familiar, Janaea Griffin is the commercializer, a space revolutionist, strategy consultant, serial and social entrepreneur, an advocate for entrepreneurship, inclusive innovation, social justice, and generational wealth, specifically with underdeserved communities. An HBCU STEM graduate, a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and the daughter of two formerly incarcerated individuals. At the young age of 16, she and her younger brother of 6 were introduced into a world of what it was meant to experience hardship, not knowing it would be a catalyst in helping her to fulfill her purpose. 14 years later, 2 degrees, a certificate, and a contracting job with the National Aeronautics Space Industry, also known as NASA, Janaea's passion for problem solving and establishing connections would turn her into a lead technology transfer specialist contractor and an executive board member for federal labs all over the country. She recently founded a consulting setup called The Commercializer, a strategic firm that actualizes independent investors' intellectual assets, monetizes entrepreneurs' ideas, and bridges the gap between resources and historically excluded communities. In addition, she's the co-founder of a creative agency called Con Creates, focused on changing the stigma and narrative behind how society views people with criminal histories and how people with criminal histories view themselves. Lastly, and most recently, she began conducting a study, Diversity in Space.tech, which focuses on increasing diversity in space for historically excluded communities, creating the first ever Equity Space Alliance to advocate and ensure that the new space economy is diverse, equitable, inclusive, and accessible. It's my honor to welcome now Janaea Griffin to talk more about what she does and the conversation she's having. Janaea.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, you're good, girl. You're good. Everything's good now.
Let me get my hi. So thank you so much for that. And I did not know that you were going to be hosting this. This is so amazing.
Oh my God, reunited. It feels so good.
Yeah. It's so great to see you. And I'm like, wait a minute. I know that voice. I recognize.
I know. I'm like, I know that bio.
So yeah, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here to really talk to you about a couple of different things. And my background, which Meredith was explaining, is a lot of diverse. I come from a slew of different industries. And so my talk today is really going to be around how we can, look at those different diverse perspectives and be inclusive of everyone, so that, all of humanity can be represented when we're talking about the new space economy. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Oh, perfect. So yeah, as Meredith explained, so just to give a little bit of background about myself. So I actually am a former technology transfer specialist, and I'm not too sure about how many people know about technology transfer that are on the call right now. But essentially, I take technologies that have been developed by the federal labs or by any type of government entity, institution. If you have a patent, I have a way for you to sell it. And so I take, I used to, let me just say that. So I'm a former technology transfer specialist, but I used to take technologies that were developed in the lab, and I would actually find commercial companies to license the rights to use these and turn them into commercial products. So things that we, use every day. And I have a video in the next slide that I'll share with you about what that is and what that looks like for us. But I wanted to give you kind of just a quick snapshot of what my background is, because it's very, very unique and a very different path that I went down. So currently right now, I'm the CEO of the Commercializer, as Meredith said. So we're monetizing IP across the nation, specifically in historically excluded communities, but helping them realize the potential of the intellectual property that they have. And then also bridging the gap between those resources that can really propel historically excluded communities in a way in which they can actually contribute and have value in the economy. So I sat on the Federal Laboratory Consortium's board as a member. My background came from, if you can't believe it, forensic chemistry and criminal justice. And so how did I end up at NASA, right? I always get that question. And I think, what it comes down to is really me understanding that I'm a problem solver. And so as I was able to solve problems, I was able to take that in different industries and make those connections. And I love connecting with people. I love connecting the dots. I love, connecting with people. And so, I have a very unique background. I have a very different background. At NASA, I didn't really use my STEM background. And I think that that's important, specifically when we start talking about creating a workforce or creating an environment where we have to be inclusive of everyone, and not just focus on, because we are in the STEM industry, people who have STEM backgrounds. There's, different organizations that, if the truth be told, we're all a business, right? And so businesses need different departments to run. So you're going to need that graphic design business. You're going to need, or the graphic design department, the communications, the legal. None of these have STEM, STEM educational, requirements. And so I think, we're leaving a huge gap and a huge, I would say, market behind when we think about, who are we hiring, where are we getting them from, and what are some of the requirements that we're putting out there, specifically when we start going out to educate people about the opportunities that exist. So let me just give you a little bit of background about tech transfer. Hopefully this works.
GPS navigation is everywhere these days. Our cars, our phones, and even our watches. But did you know that GPS was originally developed by our nation's top defense laboratories for use in military operations? Thanks to a process called technology transfer, GPS has been made accessible for businesses for the last 20 years. Every day, our federal laboratories conduct exciting research, create new materials and devices, invent technologies that lead to life-saving medicines, and produce the latest and greatest in science and technology. Savvy entrepreneurs and business people, like you, have benefited from federal resources by commercializing these technologies, which helped grow their business and our economy. The federal laboratories are eager to make their ideas and inventions, even their facilities, available to all American businesses, from startups to large corporations. Imagine being able to license and sell the latest technologies from NASA, the Department of Energy, or the National Institutes of Health, or gain access to state-of-the-art federal labs for your own projects. For example, You can access Brookhaven National Laboratory to conduct testing on everything from hydrogen storage materials to metallurgical reactions. You could even partner with government scientists already conducting advanced work in your field as a launching point for your totally new concepts. Some of the most groundbreaking technologies have come out of lab partnerships and lead to more spin-offs than a technology may have originally been developed for. Memory foam, originally developed by NASA to absorb shock impact during space shuttle launches, has been commercialized into products ranging from mattresses to sports equipment and even prosthetics. A program instituted by the Department of Defense to help military commanders manage information overload has now become part of the Apple iOS we all know as Siri.
Okay, I set up your meeting for today at 4 p.m.
Start by reaching out to a federal laboratory or agency representative to see what resources they may have available. And this is where we, the Federal Laboratory Consortium for Technology Transfer, the FLC, come in. Visit our website at www.federallabs.org to find out how technology transfer can help your business succeed.
So I'll stop that there because I think it's really important to just talk about the different types of technologies that actually do come out of the federal labs, right? And how this actually specifically from NASA, since we're talking about space technologies, how those technologies have actually benefited us here on Earth. And I think one of the things that is important to discuss is that a lot of people don't really know that this is what's happening. They just have their phone and they just like, hey, I'm going to use it, right? They don't necessarily understand, like, where does this phone come from? How is this technology working? Where's the technology coming from? And so I know we're talking about, STEM, we're talking about tech, but there are a lot of things that actually go into this. Like I said, I don't use my STEM background in order to market this type of technology, right? I don't use my STEM background to go to conferences to actually communicate with people to get them to understand the value in which these technologies have and the benefits they have in terms of them being able to be commercialized. And so I think it's really important that when we start thinking about, diverse workforces or just diversity in general, diversity, inclusion, equity in general, we need to think about, like, what are the diverse perspectives that exist? What are the diverse backgrounds that exist that will enable us to actually be more innovative? And so one of the, let's see. Our next slide. Okay, here we go. So more than 50 years ago, NASA's Apollo 11 mission sent the first men to the moon. And the achievement was described by astronaut Neil Armstrong as one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind, which everybody hears all the time. We know this, right? But the only problem is that it only talks about men, and more specifically, white men, right? No shame. But let's just talk about the facts here, right? So there are over 300 astronauts that have actually gone to space. And a small percentage of those actually look like what the Earth is representative of, right? And so when you start thinking about humanity in space, there are many fields of sciences that exist when that have actually been dominated by white men, but recent efforts to send humans to the moon and Mars have actually sparked a conversation about the importance of diversity in the scientific community and future deep space exploration missions. If we don't have diversity in the labs, sorry for my dogs. If we don't have diversity, equity, and inclusion within not just our workforce, but in even the rooms in which we're talking about, I'm sorry, let me close my door because my dogs are going crazy right now.
That's all right. We're good. If you ever need song and dance, I got your
Okay, I'm back. I'm so sorry, guys. But yeah, so if we're not talking about having humanity at the table, right, then a lot of the technologies that are developed that are actually benefiting Earth may not have those innovative ideas in terms of commercialization. So, you know, there are a lot of problems that are affecting communities, historically excluded communities of color. And I think the issue that we face, or the challenge that we face, is that, hey, when you have a diverse workforce, or when you have diversity that is sitting at the table with you, then you have a diverse set of thoughts. You have a diverse set of backgrounds, a diverse set of experiences that will all help to enable new innovations, and solve new challenges in ways in which you would never have thought of. Pressing the wrong button here. So what is diversity, equity, inclusion? And I like to always give the analogy of the party, right? So diversity is inviting someone to the party. Inclusion is asking them to dance. But people always kind of mull over the equity piece, right? And so when we start talking about equity, equity is actually being a part of the committee that created the party, right? That they don't people don't necessarily need an invitation to the party, because, you know, they came up with the themes. They said, hey, here's the list, here's the people that I want to come. And so they were able to actually contribute. And so what does that look like within your organization? So let's speak the same language. So obviously diversity is a presence of differences within a given setting. In the workplace, that can mean differences in race, in ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, socioeconomic class. We can continue to go on with the demographics. But then there's the equity piece, which is the act of ensuring that processes and programs are impartial, fair, and provide equal possible outcomes for every individual. So that looks like having somebody be able to sit at the table to actually have the authority to make decisions, right? They have decision-making power. And then you have inclusion, which is the practice of ensuring that people feel a sense of belonging in the workplace. And this is important because it means that every employee feels comfortable and supported by the organization when it comes to being their authentic selves. If you do not have people within your organization who feel genuine, who feel like they belong, who feel welcome, then there are a lot of challenges that exist when it comes to innovation, right? There are going to be barriers that exist for them. And so if we could remove what those barriers looks like by actually providing opportunities for inclusion, for equity, for diversity, then I think we will have a better time, specifically when we start to build out what this new space economy will look like. The next slide. So if you think about that, I think a lot of people, and I've kind of been talking about this throughout the session, is that, you know, demographics, and we talk about gender, we talk about age, and we talk about all of these things, but really diversity, once you start getting into innovation and start getting into building new economies and bringing those economies to scale, diversity of thought is so important. So it shouldn't just be on race and ethnicity and gender. And I know, you know, I touched on, hey, there's not that many women or that many Black women or that many minority women that are, you know, involved within the space, within space exploration. But diversity of thought is very important. And going back to my background, right? So again, I'm not in STEM. Well, I don't practice STEM, though I do have a STEM background, but that plays a role in the ways in which I'm able to show up, the ways in which I'm able to bring value and contribute value to my team. And so when you start thinking about different experiences, right? So it's not just the thought, it's also the experiential parts of what diversity, equity, inclusion look like. So traditions, people's cultures, all of this gives them a very unique perspective so that when they're looking at problems that your organization may be facing, they can come at it from a different angle. So it's important that we include everyone to be representative of that at the table. and include those opportunities as well. So if you don't have many people who are have a minority background, then you should go to where they are. Right, there are plenty of minority serving institutions that you're able to partner with. Or if you do have people, maybe talk with them directly to understand exactly what a true diverse organization looks like, or a true equitable organization looks like. Because I think we need to start having those conversations, specifically when we start talking about space, because we're currently in our fourth industrial revolution, but when we get to the fifth one, we don't want to be on another planet still asking for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, NASA's mission to send humans back to the moon by 2024 is proof of the agency's effort to make space exploration crews as representative of humanity as possible. And that includes everyone, not just people with STEM backgrounds. It doesn't just include women. It doesn't just include elderly people or younger people. I know we've been seeing a lot of these launches, and now there's the oldest person that's been in space, right? There's so many different and unique perspectives that I think we'll start to see coming out of this, that it would be beneficial to make sure that all those types of perspectives are included within your organization as you continue to innovate. And then I think that is the end.
Well, that's definitely great. I mean, like I meeting you in person, I just knew the first minute, like I could feel your passion. I could feel what you're doing, and to take something where your degree is in one thing and showing that it's so much more that you can do with your life. And I think I personally connected on that because I always thought I was going to be a meteorologist, and I am now. But now I'm really getting into the science and space storytelling, and it's a whole new chapter. And so my question for you personally is, what can we do as women in these career fields to come together, to show unity, but to support each other and to get our missions out there so we can help more people with what we're doing based on our individual backgrounds, like you were just talking about?
Yeah, well, I think one of the main things is education, right? And also proximity, right? So when you don't necessarily we're not necessarily in close proximity to, like, let's just say a NASA center or a space camp, or I live in Lancaster, California, which is right near the Mojave Desert. So we have Boeing, Northrop Grumman, we have NASA, we're a very aerospace focused city. And so, not everybody is in close proximity to something like that. And so when you're coming to these communities that you want to get involved, then you need to educate them on the benefits that aerospace, or that space just in general, has for them, which is why I think it's very important that I show that tech transfer video wherever I go, so people understand exactly where a lot of the things that we use that have been resourceful for us come from. So, what I like to tell people is you probably touch space 10 times before you leave your home. And so to have these conversations about maybe space not being for them, right? They don't think space is for them, or they don't think that what they're doing currently impacts space, or it's easily translatable into space. Like I said, I'm a chemistry background and a criminal justice background. And I liked computers, right? That has nothing to do with what I'm doing right now for NASA, right? So there's so many different opportunities, so many different jobs that people are going to need to do, because it's going to take a village in order for us to get to where we need to go and to continue innovating. So education is critical, it's vital, but you can't just provide the information and then expect that people are going to say, oh, I get it now, right? It has to make sense for them. How do they show up in it? What is their role? How is it best positioned so that they can actually take advantage, or it actually is of value to them? And so I think that storytelling is critical, especially when we start talking about all of these new commercial space companies that are coming on board and coming into play. So like, what are you doing for the economy, but what are you doing for the communities? How are these companies showing up, giving back? And so making their presence known in these communities, specifically ones that are marginalized, so that there is a presence and people know, oh, I know about Boeing, or I know about, I can name all these things because like I grew up around them. I didn't work for them, but I grew up around them so that I knew, what was going on. Oh, they're in space. And they had, outreach programs where they would come out and talk to the kids, and to the schools about, what was going on. So I think it's really about getting people involved in a way in which it relates best to them.
That's awesome. I have another great question that came in. Most tech transfer offices prefer serial entrepreneurs. Is there a different approach at NASA for female and first-time entrepreneurs?
Okay, so let me ask a question to just verify. So are you talking in terms of working at a tech transfer office or licensing technology from the tech transfer office?
Licensing technology.
Okay.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. At NASA, I think, it doesn't necessarily, obviously they were looking for those serial entrepreneurs, because you are looking for people to, for multiple technologies to be licensed, right? But really there's over 1,400. Okay, so across federal labs, there's over 14,000 patents that are just sitting on the shelves waiting to be commercialized. And so, I understand, where you're coming from, where you're saying like, hey, most technology transfer offices are looking for serial entrepreneurs. Well, it's because we have a lot of technologies just sitting there. However, if you are just a startup, NASA has a startup program, a startup option that they always, publicized and pushed out, so that if you want to even just get into, tech, or if you want to get into the space industry, you actually can license that technology, and then and there's no upfront cost for that. I don't think that they've changed it since I've left. But it actually gives you the opportunity to say, hey, I want to try this out. I want to test it and see if it's a product that may be a good fit for the market. And they allow you to do that without having to pay any upfront costs for, I want to say, about 3 years. And so you get to develop the technology, because one of the biggest issues is that there are technologies that have been created for very mission specific goals. And so there's a huge gap that we call crossing the chasm, right? Or the valley of death of development that you need to get over before the technology can actually become a practical application. And so I think that there are a lot of different opportunities that are available. But if you are interested and you're not a serial entrepreneur, startup options are definitely a great way, or evaluation or research licenses are a great way to get into that space.
That's awesome. We have time for one more question. Unless there's any other ones out there, we have a little extra time. So the next question coming in is, how fresh or recent are these technologies? Do you feel they're outdated?
Do I feel they're outdated? So, outdated is subjective. When you think about technologies, because a lot of technologies don't see, particularly when we see spinoffs, right? A lot of the technologies have been in development for years before they even see the light of day, right? And so it really just depends on the functionality of the technology and what you're going to use it for. So I don't believe that they're outdated. I just believe that they can be used in different ways. And it really just depends on how you would like to use it. So if there are no new methods that have, come across, if the patent is still something that, you know, is new and novel, then there are a multitude of ways that you would be able to actually apply it. And so it may be new in one industry, but old in another. And so I think that it really just depends on how you look at it. I don't believe that they are outdated, but you know, that's just my personal opinion, because I think that you can apply it in different ways in different industries.
So I have a question for you too. I mean, you're bringing up so many really good points, and especially when we're talking about diversity. And I know we just had our Dress for STEM Day. We just had International Women's History Day. You know, what do you see are the biggest problems that women in diverse cultures are facing? And what's the best way to overcome them to move forward, but also to increase the amount of people that are getting involved in these space and science careers and really flourish our workplaces with this diversity?
Yeah, well, two things. So one, kind of going back to, you know, what I had mentioned before about, you know, it only talked about men, right? And so if you have a very male dominated field, a lot of times the people who are keeping the women out, you know, don't look like them. And so it's really going to take from both sides, right? It's going to take from the women's side to continue to push and to ask, right? To be very, what is the word I want to
Blunt?
say? Well, no, like just like, what's the word? Oh gosh, unapologetic.
Yes.
That's the thing.
That's
It's
good.
going to take women to be unapologetic, to show up in the ways in which they need to hold men accountable, right? For making sure and ensuring that there's a diverse population within their organization, right? I think the other thing is from the men's side, is that they need to be champions and advocates for it, and intentional, right? Intentionality is a huge thing. And so if they are saying, hey, we want to make space, or we want to make organizations more equitable, more diverse, we want to include more women, then they need to actually be the ones to go out and do the work, right? They need to champion people. They need to say, hey, I know, you know, Meredith over here, she's working in this area, and I want to bring her in, right? Or they need to speak up when women are not in the room, because how do we know, right? If there are no women in the room, then there is nobody to voice for women. So they need to be voices for the voiceless, right? They need to be voices for people who are not representative at the table. And that, you know, goes for minorities as well, right? If we want to have a hugely equitable workforce, or a representative workforce of what Earth looks like specifically as we talk about space, then we need to make sure that everyone is at the, and if they are not, then we need to say, hey, we should be thinking about X, Y, and Z. And that's where that intentionality comes in. And I think if we're both intentional from both sides, then we can meet in the middle, and we can, you know, collaborate more effectively versus just pointing the finger and saying, hey, it's your fault. Hey, you need to do this. We already know that that's it, right? The facts are, right, there's not enough women in this space. The facts are, is not enough minorities in this space. And so we can't continue to point the finger, because then nothing will ever get done. If we're saying that we want to show up, let's just show up and do that. Be intentional. Have hold people accountable for what they say that they are going to do. And then there's also that intentionality comes with, again, going back to the educational aspect, right? Reaching out into these industries, or into maybe the schools, where you can show up and provide, like, that child who doesn't maybe think that they should get into space, or that they should, you know, be in STEM, or, you know, when you think, I think there was a study, and it showed how little girls and little boys were sitting there, and then they were asking them, like, what toy they wanted. And the little girl would just always go for the Barbie. She wouldn't think that she should be an engineer, or she should play with, you know, trucks or different things like that. And I think it's important to educate them as they're growing up, to say, hey, no, like, this is for everyone, right? You should be able to do what you want to do. And so having that intentionality, that education, and showing up for people to give them those opportunities, I think is important.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was in the library reading weather books and I played with Barbies on the side, but I get it. Actually, race cars were fun too. But this was so great. Janae Griffin, thank you so much for joining us today. You are motivational as always. It's great to hear your work and what you're doing and how you're changing the world one conversation at a time. And I hope I see you at either Satellite Conference or Space Symposium in April, because I look forward to seeing you again and chatting more in person.
Yeah, I should be there. I should be there. Oh, I thought did I answer this other question? Do we still have time?
Yeah, one more question. How should they phrase it to appeal to those who don't care about diversity? And this is a good thing per se. What specific benefits of diversity tend to resonate in these cases? And that's very true. There are those people that are doing the pushback, and unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, sometimes it's in your own workplace.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think there now have been studies that show that diversity actually matters. But again, when we talk about diversity, it's always about, I think there's a negative connotation that exists when people hear that and they think about all of the education, all of the things that people have been saying about it. And it's, now there's a whole department around it and it's an HR thing. So, there's a lot of things that a lot of negative connotations that are attached to it. I think it's more so about changing the narrative about what that looks like, and it's about including, it's not just race and ethnicity. It's not just gender, right? It's diversity of thought. It's diversity of experiences and cultures and traditions. And if you want to be truly diverse, right, you cannot just sit and have the same person at the table. So if you think about it, right, if you could explain it or break it down in a way in which an organization operates, in order to run a business, you need all these different departments, right? You need, and I explained that earlier, legal, you need finance and accounting, marketing, communications, right? Then you have leadership, and then you have even facilities and different things like that. And so if you think about diversity from that perspective, then it could make sense, right? Because in order to be successful, you need all of those pieces to actually play. You could break it down using a sports analogy, right? On a team, like you need different positions, right? And you need somebody that knows how to shoot. You need somebody that knows how to guard. You need somebody that knows how to take charges, right? Or to inbound,
rebound, yeah.
Yeah, right? All of these different things. I think it's just about the narrative and the storytelling so that people don't necessarily feel attacked, and to have those difficult conversations.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I thought of a puzzle, you have so many pieces. They're all different, not 2 pieces in 100, 200 piece puzzle set are the same. But once you put them all together, they make the most beautiful thing afterwards. So, it's just let people be individual, let them be diverse in their own way, but just know that you're never going to meet somebody that's like you, and accept everyone for who they are. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this was great. We appreciate you, Janae Griffin. You can see her information's on here. Reach out on LinkedIn, continue the conversation. We're really excited now transitioning to our next interview. It's another pre-recorded interview, but it is going to be with Bob Walker, former Congressman Bob Walker. For more than 4 decades, Congressman Bob Walker has been a political leader and an insightful public policy advocate. Legislatively, he wrote law that created commercial space policy and hydrogen energy policy. In 2016, he was most recently a senior space advisor to President Trump, and President George W. Bush appointed him to 3 presidential commissions, including chairman of the Commission on the Future of the United States Aerospace Industry in 2002. And during the end of the Bush administration, Obama administration, he served as the chairman of the Department of Energy's Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technical Advisory Committee. Presently, he serves as a trusted advisor to the National Space Council, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Energy, NASA, the White House, and the Air Force on space and technology policies. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Education from Millersville University in Pennsylvania, where he established the Robert S. and Sue A. Walker Institute for Leadership and Civic Engagement. I'm very excited to share with you now this video, a short conversation between Bob Walker and Tim Kreisman recorded earlier this week. So hope you enjoy. And again, if you want to add some conversation questions while this is going on, feel free to hop into the chat.
All right, next up we have Congressman Bob Walker, and this is a really exciting talk. Congressman Bob Walker has served for 20 years as congressman for Pennsylvania's 16th district. While he was in Congress, he became the chairman of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. He served as the Republican Chief Deputy Whip, chairman of the Republican Leadership, vice chairman of the Budget Committee, and the Speaker pro tempore. Since leaving Congress, he's served on 3 presidential commissions, chairing the Commission on the Future of the U.S. Aerospace Industry. He's also chaired the Department of Energy's Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Tech Advisory Committee. He served on the Space Foundation as the chair of their board, the Newt Gingrich for President campaign, the DCH Company Board of Directors, and the American Foundation of the American Australian Leadership Dialogue. His corporate board memberships have included Aerospace Corporation, Space Adventures, and Space Dev. Congressman Walker is a regular presence, providing media commentary on Newsmax, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, and even PBS. He has written or co-authored several books and has been published by major newspapers, including the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Times. So we are very excited to hear from the congressman and look forward to what he has to say. All right, thanks for being here today, Congressman.
Nice to be with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to have a chance to chat with you a little bit more about political action committees, what they're used for, what they're good for. But I want to take a second to talk about you and sort of where you grew up in and how you got to space.
Okay, well, I am presently the CEO of Moonwalker Associates. We're a consulting and lobbying firm based in Washington, although our offices are in Arlington, Virginia. I was born in Bradford, Pennsylvania, which is way up in the northwestern part of Pennsylvania, right up against the New York border. When I was a kid, we moved down to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where my dad took a professorship at Millersville University. So I've really been Lancaster based for all that time. We moved here in '57, so I've got have a long association now with Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I was a school teacher to begin with. I went from that to being a congressional aide for my predecessor. When he decided to retire, he backed me to run for the seat. That didn't stop 11 other people from getting into the race. but in my congressional district, the primary was the only race of significance. When I won the primary, I was pretty much set for the rest of the time. I got to Congress and got assigned to the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. At that point, I think a good part of my science teachers from high school and college had a heart attack because it was not exactly my main interest in college. I was also put on the Government Operations Committee at that point, which has since morphed into being the Committee on Infrastructure there. And that was one that I wanted, because my plan was to be on a generalist committee that had broad jurisdictions in the Congress, and with the hope of someday being on the Rules Committee. But I gained a lot of seniority on the Science Committee, and by the time I got considered for the Rules Committee. I was a ranking member of the Science Committee, and I decided to stay there because in all honesty, I found it fascinating. I mean, I was a part of some hearings. Al Gore chaired a hearing that we had in that committee. That was the first hearing held on the internet on Capitol Hill. And so, it was that kind of thing. But my main focus ended up being the space program. Because I took a real interest in that. And I actually had a subcommittee at government operations that also focused on space. And so I got kind of a dual dose of it. The other thing was that very early in my career, the first 6 months of my career, I became the ranking member on a subcommittee on science.
Wow.
As a result of some shifts in what senior members were doing, I ended up being a ranking member of a subcommittee. That provided a pretty good incentive for being on that committee. So anyhow, I did specialize in space, and I really wrote the first legislation that became law that formed the what is now AST at the FFA, and also the department, at the Department of Commerce, the Office of Space Commerce there. And so, and I had started getting interested in pursuing the whole commercial space business late 70s, early 80s. And so it was kind of a lonely road at that point because the big primes were not necessarily enthusiastic about somebody that was out talking about a new model for NASA spending. But that road and that route is what kind of took me then into the space arena in kind of a unique role. And space also led me to be a heavy advocate for moving to a hydrogen economy, which I still do these days.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is how there's not a set career path that can lead you to space. There really is a need for a wide range of people. Your undergrad degree was, I believe, education.
Yeah. I was in education. Social science was, and when I went out to teach, I taught basically taught political and economic policy.
No, and I think it's important for a lot of people, especially the next generation, to hear that there's a wide range here, and if we need
and getting wider. I mean, what's happening in commercial space right now means that the aperture has been opened significantly, and for young people who want to get in the space business doesn't necessarily mean they have to be an astronaut to get in the space business.
Exactly. Yeah, which is exciting. I wanted to turn to these political action committees because there's a lot of, I mean, I'm in the Beltway, all my degrees are in political science. So it seems like PACs are ubiquitous, but in reality, they're not. And so I wanted to, get a sense from you of what is it that they do from, on your side. You were a member of Congress, and how did that work for you, and was it a tool?
Well, I've seen it from both sides because when I retired from Congress, I went with a company called Wexler Walker, and we had our own PAC. So I saw it. I was on the PAC committee for the whole time that I was at Wexler Walker. So I've kind of seen it from the congressional side and from the PAC side. Well, from the congressional side, it has become absolutely essential for members to raise significant sums of money. And part of it is something that I'm a little uncomfortable with, because I think that money now governs how people move onto key committees, move into the leadership, and so on. But having said that, the fact is that members are scrambling to raise money all the time. And one of the better ways of being able to help is using PAC funds, which tend to be more valuable in a way to the members, because you can give usually more significant sums of money than you can as an individual.
Right.
So, so it's important for the PACs then to understand just exactly what their mission is. If you scatter shot things too much, you're not very effective.
Yeah.
And even in deciding where you're going to interact with members becomes important. I mean, obviously there are fundraisers held every night in Washington, and you know, and they're relatively inexpensive. I have found the most effective way to use your PAC is to go to some of the retreats that the members hold. Because while they tend to be expensive, on the other hand, you not only get to see that particular member, a lot of them have a whole group of members that show up. And particularly if it's a golf outing or things like that, members who like to play golf show up at you know, their buddies' fundraiser. So I have found that is an extremely good way, because you sit down to dinners. You know, you spend a weekend doing this. You sit down at dinners. There are little events. Usually, some member of the leadership is at them. And so you may get an opportunity to get to know 6, 7, or 8 members at one of these outings. And so you need to keep that as something where the PAC can be very effective, and where most people can't afford to do them on their individual dime.
For sure. Yeah. No, and I think the narrow focus, I think, is really important, because a lot of what's done, at least in the space sector, almost seems scattershot with some of the advocacy or some of the work that it's, you know, cuts across committees or is pretty broad.
Well, one of the things that was mentioned to me was that you're looking with this to not necessarily focus on only the committees that have a specific jurisdiction, like the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. But you're looking to educate members that don't think they have any real interest in space about why it impacts all of that. I mean, I think of a guy like G.T. Thompson from Pennsylvania here, who is the ranking member of the Agriculture Committee. Well, the fact is, there's a huge impact of space in agriculture. I don't know whether GT spends any time thinking about space policy or not, but he's, you know, if the Republicans take control of the Congress, he's going to be the next chairman of agriculture. And so getting him up to speed of why agriculture has a huge stake in what's happened in space is really an important matter. Now, with all these companies, you know, doing all kinds of ways of financing the companies, the finance committee becomes a huge player in the space business, even if they don't know that they are interacting in the space business.
Right. Well, and it's currently a little absurd, because we saw bills, to the finance point, limiting investment in space companies from China being filed in the science and tech committees. And any other bill like that would go through.
Yeah, well, those are things you have to be real careful with, because jurisdictional disputes in the Congress are, you know, really mean battles. We used to battle on environmental issues at the Science, Space, and Technology Committee with the Interior Committee. And I mean, they were just, you know, livid that they thought we were getting in their jurisdiction. Science, Space, and Technology Committee is livid that the Transportation Committee is trying to get a piece of the space jurisdiction that has always been exclusively the role of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. We had constant battles with the Energy and Commerce Committee. So I'm just saying, you've got to be very careful about getting in the middle of that. Because you'll have chairman just excoriating you if you're trying to switch jurisdictions on some of these. But
Sure.
what you can look at doing using the PAC and using particularly the members of the PAC to make a pitch is to talk about joint jurisdiction on some of these things.
Yeah, no, I think that's especially important. And the jurisdiction sounds a bit like the long war for the executive branch over budgeting. You don't step in the middle of that.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, the administration for 2 administrations now, they've been trying to get a something done on the Hill on the whole business of space sustainability and having the Commerce Department take over the space sustainability role.
Yeah.
And it's a jurisdictional dispute on the Hill.
Yeah.
And so nothing ever gets done. But meantime, it's one of the fundamental needs
Right.
in the space community at the present time. So
yeah, no, it's wild. I wanted to thank you for taking the time to talk with us today, Congressman. This has been really useful. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Nice to be with you.
Yep. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That was great. Thank you so much. Congressman actually is going to be joining us again in just a little bit. So we're going to be having Congressman Walker join us in a little while for the panel that's after this next segment. So that'll be fun in case you might have thought of some questions while he was talking that you could have. But for right now, because we all know that second cup of coffee sometimes is a lifesaver, or maybe you just need to stretch your legs, walk around. I think it's highly recommended. You're supposed to have so many little breaks in a day. So we're going to take a 5-minute break right now, a little stretch break, grab some coffee, maybe a snack if you're like me and you like to eat all the time. And then in 5 minutes, we'll be back and I'll introduce our next panelist for us. So take 5. if you're joining us from a earlier time zone than here on the East Coast. I hope you're having a great time. This has been such a great panel. So interesting to learn about everyone's backgrounds and their contributions to this conversation, and especially the way we're changing the workplace together. We're making differences. We're going out there. We're sharing our passions and taking ideas and running with them and being innovative. I'm really, really excited for our next speakers. And yeah, someone was commenting about the West Coast. Yeah, I remember living in California, all my East Coast meetings. I'm like, I'm just waking up. This is so rough. But I'm really excited to introduce Andrew Bossert and Severin Blankush. And then after their talk, unfortunately, I have to go to work and present the weather for us here across the tri-state region. But you are lucky because Rob Gabbard's going to be joining us, and he will actually be leading the panel after this one with Andrew, Severin, and Congressman Walker. And so it's been really fun to do this today. But let me introduce you our next speakers, and then I will pass the torch to Andrew. But just to introduce Andrew for you, just so you know, he is actually the co-founder and a managing partner of the Space Advisory Group, LLC. Space Advisory Group is a boutique advisory firm which specializes in federal acquisitions. The firm was established in 2020 to assist startups in navigating the federal acquisition landscape. Now, additionally, Andrew serves in the United States Air Force Reserves as an individual mobilization augmentee. Thank you for your service. Previously, Andrew served on active duty as an officer in the United States Air Force. He most recently served as an advanced concepts contracting officer, special programs, Space and Missile Systems Center, Los Angeles Air Force Base, California. He was responsible for contract execution, administration of a $740 million portfolio. In this role, Andrew supported classified programs to field and sustain cutting-edge space technology, ensuring space superiority for the United States. Andrew entered active duty in 2015 as a distinguished graduate of the Air Force ROTC program at the University of North Texas. He serves in various contracting and acquisition positions, including base level services, construction and commodities, as well as operational contract support, space systems, classified contracts, contingency, and completed a tour with the USSO COM's Special Operations Forces Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics Contracting GHOST program. Andrew deployed to Kabul, Afghanistan, in support of the Operation Freedom Sentinel as the Chief of Contracting for the Special Mission, Special Operations Advisory Group, Special Operations Joint Task Force, Afghanistan from 2019 until 2020. Andrew is a certified public accountant in the state of California, holds a Master's of Science in Accountancy and Bachelor of Arts in Economics and Finance from the University of Dallas. Now, Severin is a retired colonel, a 27-year Air Force veteran whose career included multiple contracting and leadership positions. His space experience included 3 years in classified programs with the Space and Missile Systems Center and 4 years with the National Reconnaissance Office. After retirement, Severin served as an assistant vice president with the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. He then performed acquisition strategy and business intelligence duties for the newly formed Space Rapid Capabilities Office. Severin is currently managing partner for the Space Advisory Group, and we are so excited to have you both here today to share your conversation in the workplace. And Andrew, I know you will do a fantastic job moderating and hosting this last part of today's session. So thanks everybody for having me here and sending you all sunny skies.
Thank you, Meredith. We appreciate it. I guess to add a little bit more about Space Advisory Group. So as Meredith mentioned, Severin and I both came out of the Air Force, currently running Space Advisory Group, a newly established firm. And what we're focused on is to help the military transition technologies or to integrate them into existing legacy systems, to replace legacy systems, and to be able to fit into the space systems architecture that exists. We noticed that through this big innovation push that has happened since the stand-up of DIU-X, which is now DIU, and then the advent of SOFWorks, the advent of AFWorks, et cetera, There's been a huge drive to bring in non-traditional defense contractors who are moving faster than the traditional contractors typically move, faster than the government moves, and to bring their unique and innovative solutions to the warfighters, whether that's Army, Navy, Air Force, et cetera. We decided to focus on specifically space for a couple of reasons. A, because space is very unique, it's new, and in our backgrounds, we came out of the Space Force, or what was Air Force Space Command previously. And looking across the services, it seems like the Space Force is the most susceptible to innovation and taking risks and bringing on those new and unique solutions. With there, I'll pause and turn it over to Severin to add some additional details.
Yeah, sure. So part of the services that we offer are helping not only advise folks on what is available for the SBIR and the STTR programs, but also to get that leg up for the program of record. There's a lot of talk about the accelerators and the challenges, getting companies kind of educated on the processes, but then not actually assisting them going forward. So an example would be you finish your challenge and they say, okay, now you need to go get an MOU or a letter of support from an end user. Go. And if you don't have if you have not had any interaction with the Space Force or an acquisition organization to know where to even begin, you could spend a lot of valuable time and resources, chasing the wrong end. So having that understanding of where to, target and intelligently target an approach for matching a capability to an end user is really key. And even sometimes the Space Force folks don't understand their own policies on how to implement a attack PI or a strat PI. So part of what happens is an education of the government customer as well, because some folks are uncomfortable at the thought of committing to something, but when they understand what the benefits are to both the organization and to the small business and to the Space Force at large, they really tend to gravitate towards utilizing those tools. Andrew?
Yeah, so I think Rob is going to hop on here and present some Q&A. There he is. Perfect timing.
How's it going, guys? Good to see you all again.
Good to see you as well, Rob.
Good. I don't know if we have Congressman Walker here yet, but he should be joining us here in a few minutes. So I guess I'll maybe just introduce myself. I'm Rob Gabbert. I'm with Space Pack. I don't know if you've seen it around, but we just launched about a month ago. And the goal of the pack is really to make space a priority in Congress. So what does that mean? You've probably heard, if you've been here all day, you've been listening to all the need for workforce development, all the new things happening in the space industry and in Congress. And quite frankly, the public don't really understand the urgency and the importance of advancing the space industry and the economy. So what we're doing is kind of a grassroots support for people in Congress to specifically on tax and finance committees. Like we're just trying to make space a boring business. We're too far along. They think that space is for billionaires or it's some science project, and it's actually a reality. We've got people working in software, HR, marketing. We need people that can bend aluminum and steel. We don't just need rocket scientists. So that's kind of the role of the pack, is to be at the table. We're competing against finance, healthcare, insurance for these members of Congress's time. So how are we going to get our initiatives out there? And that's what we're doing. We're just having a seat at the table and raising money and donating to candidates. And very soon we'll be starting to launch ad campaigns, mainly for public awareness just as much as awareness in Congress. And we want to show all the different people that work in the industry all across the nation, across every type of business and job. Space is here. It's not 10 years from now, and it's desperate for, America to really lead if we want to live in a free and democratic future in the future. So that's a little bit of background on me, and I guess glad to have you all here. Still waiting on the congressman here. I really want to pick his brain on something. I'm a guy from Kentucky. I was a mining engineer for a long time, and serendipitously got brought into the space industry, and it changed my life. Just seeing the optimism and hope for the future that the industry brings to people like me from a state that's usually typically depressed economies. And Bob, Congressman Walker, comes from Pennsylvania, another coal mining state. We've got a lot of workers in those areas of the country that are very skilled with bending metal. And how can states like that play a role in supplying the state of the space industrial base? As I like to tell people that we're kind of at the beginning of the commercial airline industry, where things like, well, there's 2 people riding on that. Well, no way they can get 20. No way we can get 100. And so space is starting to commoditize, and you're going to start needing little trinkets and widgets that need to be manufactured at scale. Everything needs to be commoditized, and it's not going to be super specialized. It's going to be cheap, replaceable, and we need to be able to do that fast. And we need to rely on states outside of the Florida, Texas, California. Well, those guys are doing a great job, and they're going to be, how can other states, the flyover states, help in that? So that's really what we're working on at the PAC, and raising awareness with Congress. And we're trying to get members. Just last week, I got a member of financial services out of Kentucky to join the Space Caucus. So just for them to get situational awareness, it's just too big of a leap that, we talk about space and they're like, oh, that's great, it's science. But we need to get these people, we need to be treated like any other terrestrial business out there. Like, think about the real estate industry. I don't know if you've heard of the opportunity zones, where you're allowed to invest money in lower income areas, and basically it's a way to defer taxes. So could we create an opportunity zone in space? Or they have this thing called the 1031 exchange. When you sell a piece of property, an investment property, instead of paying taxes on that, you can reinvest it without paying taxes. So what if we could, a VC gets in a seed level stage of a space company. What if they exited at Series B? They want to reinvest that capital. Why would we tax them when they could reinvest in space assets? We have no way to finance long-term space infrastructure. I think the DoD community and my friend Gordon Resler talks a lot about the space superhighway, building the logistics networks, the gas stations, the AAAs. How do we finance that long-term? We don't have bonds. So that's a lot of things that we are doing just to raise awareness on that. We're a regular business. We just operate a little bit farther away from home, but we need to have the right incentives. We need to talk the same language as all these other industries. And that's what we're doing at the PAC. But on
hey, Rob, I got a quick question for you. So
yeah,
we're talking about, building the infrastructure. A lot of, there should be concern about standards in like connections, in fuels, in the building blocks to put together that infrastructure. What type of efforts or what type of initiatives is your PAC taking to address standards within that space infrastructure?
That's a great question. And quite frankly, Congress doesn't really have, they can't make that leap. I rely on the Space Force and the DIU and all those guys in industry to work that out. Congress is not going to solve that problem. It's too far of a leap for them, quite honestly. Maybe that'll happen, but I'm going to lean on the people that are actually doing it and building it with their hands. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with, what propellants will get standardized. Is water going to be the new oil in space? You can make hydrogen and oxygen at it, or, there's people building solar thermal rockets that can run on any propellant, even water. And I don't know if that's going to be legislation necessarily. But it's not going to be led like by us. We're not trying to be the policy experts. We are trying to be a tool to amplify people's messages and tell the story, humanize the industry so that Congress kind of understands it. And we got to just shorten the leap that they take.
Yeah, so I guess a quick follow-up on that. I don't think anyone would expect Congress to set the standards, but if they are aware that that's an issue and that sometimes the early adopters get to set that going forward, and if the U.S. can be that standard setter or at least lead in that, I think that would position the United States and our allies well in that.
No, I agree 100%. And I think they've been doing a great job, the AFRL, DIU, and Space Force with the State of the Space Industrial Base reports. I'm sure you've been part of that effort as well. So I think last year was pretty informative. It seems like everyone agrees on most things. So it'll be interesting what happens this May in New Mexico to see that next step. I think you'll see, I think you just saw Orbit Fab getting a Strat-Fi. They've got the refuel, the Rafty port that will allow them to refuel. So I don't know if that becomes a standard. And then the orbital prime solicitation that I'm sure you guys have been helping clients with, which is helping, on orbit servicing and manufacturing. How do we approach that? I know there's a lot of companies going after that. And so it should be pretty interesting to see all the different technologies. Is it a robotic arms? Is it a certain port? What is it? But I think by this summer, we'll have a pretty good idea. And you can see, I think probably from the conflict in Russia and Ukraine, you've seen more and more countries signing on to the Artemis Accords, which has been encouraging. And I think we'll be able to expand out of that, once we know what the private sector can bring to the industry. I think space has been in kind of a black box for so long. Like we didn't really want to admit what we could do. We didn't want to admit what China could do. And now we're realizing, the government's realizing that commercial industry, we have to depend on commercial industry and venture capital. And these guys are just building at light speed. And it's encouraging to see. And I think it's happening, but I guess there's been a big paradigm shift too in companies that were kind of hesitant to work with the DoD for a long time. I think, Silicon Valley was built out of the DoD and the internet. And then there was kind of a phase where, well, it's not moral or to work with the government or the DoD. And now I think they're realizing that, wow, if we want to, there's evil out there. If we really want to, live in the same free world that we do, we've got to help, and the government's not going to save us. So it's going to be interesting.
So you mentioned VC. Go ahead.
I would add real quick. Yeah. So I met with a partner from Excel Partners here in Northern California a couple of weeks ago, and his father worked at the Pentagon doing intel reports from ISR products that came back out of Vietnam. He then was an early employee at a company that would not be considered today a startup back in the 60s down here, and then has gotten to venture capital. And he said that same point, that Silicon Valley came out of the Department of Defense, and then VCs for the longest time up until now have told startups, do not go do business with the government because that's where companies go to die. Pretty ominous messaging there. But now, as you see this shift away from investing in software to investing in hardware, which is required for the space industry, and also software is required. You need the DoD and this the advent of the open topic has basically spurred this whole new industry of VCs investing in dual use technologies. And the DoD right now is the only one with a viable need for this type of hardware, and they're willing to make those investments. I think what we need to get to is how do we bridge that gap from these small dollar value, get your foot in the door type things to, okay, how do we actually transition an idea that has viable founders with the educational background, the expertise to take this idea, this concept, iterate on the technology, build a subscale prototype, a full scale prototype, move to low rate production, full rate production contracts. The DoD needs to figure out a mechanism to mitigate risks and develop a risk appetite to help these companies grow along the way, so that we really see the space industry hyper accelerate its growth into the next decade.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know if you saw the thing called Fast Grants that Patrick Collison, the CEO of Stripe, and Tyler Cowen, he's an economist, they put a thing when COVID first happened. They put together this thing called Fast Grants where they raised like $25 million in a couple of days. And then they reviewed, like it took them 48 hours to deploy all the capital, but the IP and like all the breakthroughs that they made in such a short amount of time was just incredible. And we're actually working on that. Like private industry is starting to step up to do that. I think I read a stat is like NSF, to get like an NSF grant is a little bit different than DoD, but researchers spend like 60% of their time writing reports for grants instead of actually doing the research. So, and I've been behind some of the SBIRs and STTRs, and it's a slog. And when we could actually be building the technology, you actually have to be really specialized and need people like you all. I'm glad that you all are helping people navigate that, because it's not straightforward. And if you don't have the right paperwork, or you don't have this on sam.gov, that you're just going to get missed. And so it's good to see y'all doing that. But again, I think private industry is really stepping up, hopefully to fill some of these gaps. And I know working with the DoD, you have that valley of death after your second year. Like, where do you go after you win a $250,000 or $1.5 million? But VC, I think, put $14 billion in new space companies last year. So, we're extending those investment time horizons is nice. And I really think we're going through a renaissance period where in 10 years from now, we're like, how did all this stuff happen? But I see that Congressman Bob Walker just joined us. How are you, Robert?
I'm doing fine, thanks.
Good. Well, we're glad to have you here. We're kind of just free flowing here and talking about talked a little bit about the PAC, and we were just kind of talking about DoD acquisitions and how do we speed that up, and if possible. And but tell us a little bit about your work in Congress there. I guess we had a little intro from you, but would love to hear. Do you have any ideas? How can we get the DoD to work a little bit faster?
Well, that's been a challenge for a long time. I was 17 years on the board of Aerospace Corporation that gets deeply into all of those issues, and it's been very difficult to get the policy establishment to understand that if we're going to keep up with the rest of the world, that we've got to act at the speed of technology, not the speed of legislation. And this has been exacerbated in recent years by the fact that they can't get the legislation for spending the appropriations done in time. And so here we are. We've just now done the appropriations for the fiscal year we're already in, which means that we have a half a year to spend all of the money for this fiscal year. And what happens is that there's no sense of long-term needs on that. And when you're dealing in space, you've got to have some assurance of long-term funding, and it has to be done at the speed of technology, and that just doesn't work in the kind of situation that we're now in. So I don't have a real good answer to it.
I thought that was a softball.
Other than the fact that one of the things we've got to do is make certain that we have both authorizations and appropriations. We've given up on the authorization process in the Congress, and therefore committees like the Science, Space, and Technology Committee are not really working at the level they should. And if you have authorizations that give you a long-term plan for developing programs, then you can begin to move it quickly as soon as the money becomes available. But right now, you can't do anything because the money doesn't, the policy is driven by the appropriations, and the appropriations are constantly late. And so it's a very bad situation on the Hill.
Do you think that, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the USICA bill or the Competes bill, it's the US-China bill. Basically, it's an authorization to the NSF to invest in all of our critical technologies, and space is on there. Do you see that? It looks like it will get passed eventually if the House can get itself in order, but do you think that's a decent step towards kind of this problem?
Yeah, it's a step, and but the problem with those bills is that they're designed to try to deal with a process that's gone off the tracks, and much better if you would get the authorization committees working, moving their process. The rules of the House say that you cannot appropriate money if there is not an authorization in place. That rule is constantly waived. And as a result, we've ended up in this situation. And so then what they try to do is they try to do omnibus bills that cover a whole bunch of stuff, but it doesn't give the kind of direction that should be given in a focused way.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting if this does pass. It's basically creating a monster NSF who's not exactly the most focused and efficient anyway. So it'd be nice if we had a Space Force to, had them all in parallel, broken up.
Well, and in all honesty, the defense people do better than anybody else does. I mean, they're usually a defense authorization that gets passed. But this year it was terribly late as well. Again, when you talk to the agencies that have this money to spend, and particularly the money that's spent in R&D, they're just horribly frustrated because they don't have plans in place to actually effectively use the money that they ultimately are given.
Yeah, well, we've got to do a better job at, shaking the bells up in Washington. And that's what we're trying to do at the PAC, is just kind of get in and talk to people, build relationships, and just really hammer in these ideas that just because you're not on space committee or defense, like, doesn't mean space doesn't touch your jurisdiction. And just the other day, I had Rand Paul, state director up in Kentucky State Capitol, talking about how a state like Kentucky could play a role in the manufacturing base of space. So, and I think Pennsylvania could be there too. We got a lot of displaced coal miners who've been doing really hard work with metal and steel their whole lives. Like, can we get those guys involved?
Well, one of the things that I focus on is the need to have an educational program that meets the needs. I mean, we're still operating under the old Dewey system of education that suggests that students are going to be educated in a certain way, and all of this is going to lead to a university education for them. When in fact, some of what we need in society, and in fact, a lot of what we need in society right now, is technical education. Because the space world depends upon getting a lot more in the way of technical education. And those are great paying jobs. I have a technical school in my district named for Thaddeus Stevens, who's one of my favorite historic politicians. He formed a school. He gave the money for the school in his will to educate orphan boys, but it's now evolved into a state technical school. When they graduate their classes these days, they get people in from as far away as Colorado looking for those students. And last year, I think it may have been 2 years ago that this is most recent information I had, the lowest salary paid to one of their graduates was $60,000. So I mean, these are really good jobs.
Yeah.
That is the essence of what we need in a highly technical workforce. I mean, we've got a whole new economy that's evolved here that education isn't really meeting the needs of.
I agree. I think, I don't know if we've demonized trade work, or is just we're too good for it, or what happened. There was some sort of shift at some point. But, if you look at what kids want to be when they grow up today, it's not even engineers and scientists and doctors. It's influencers and TikTok stars and, vanity projects. And I'm a little concerned. I've got a little girl on the way in July, and I'm hoping that we can figure out, I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard that TikTok does, in the States, it teaches us how to do dances and stupid things, while in China, they show science and engineering videos. It wouldn't surprise me if that's true. And I think there's a lot of people, nations that are eating away at our, I don't know what to call it, but integrity, or just, we're not serious people anymore, it seems like.
Well, part of it is that we have a generation of leadership that is 2 generations too old. I'm 79 years old. I grew up in an educational system that was basically a classical education system that was aimed at preparing students to go to college at the high school level. What we need now is far more in the way of a technical education system that, of course, includes some of the classical elements. But you've got a leadership in the state and nation that is too old to be able to understand the needs of a new economy and a new direction for the world. I was saying here just this morning, the contrast between a Zelensky speech to the Congress yesterday and the president's speech on the State of the Union a few nights before is just absolutely mind-boggling. Zelensky understands, that you don't have to throw everything into your speech except the kitchen sink. That you have a speech that is actually dynamic in nature, and you include some video in it, and you do things in a very different way than what, again, my generation thinks about as a way of moving forward. And we've got to correct that somehow.
Robin, if I can add real quick, so and we see this, right, with the Space Force taking hold of being the first digital force and how they train the next generation of space operators, right? And at Space Advisory Group, we work with a company who is trying to revolutionize the online education and training aspect. How do you train the next generation? I think I went to a liberal arts college. Everyone needs to learn how to write, how to speak, how to communicate,
Sure.
Basic education. I think it's the way that, right? It's the way that we do it. There's no nun with a ruler. There's no chalkboard anymore. It's the way that we communicate the education to the next generation is important, and taking hold of that. And you can really see that in the Space Force, right? Basic training folks are coming out of BMT with iPads. All their training is right there. They can log in. Right now it's still a bunch of different systems that they go to, but the Space Force is working to make the training seamless, to allow it to happen anywhere, and then for commanders and folks to be able to tap into the data that comes out of that to see the readiness of the force. And that's something that needs to transfer, I think, over to what we would, in the military, we would call the civilian sector, which everyone else would probably just refer to as normal life. We need to see that kind of training transfer over to other places so that we are able to provide the technical skills, but through a medium that relates to the next generation and what their interests are.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's absolutely essential. Think how much business has changed as a result of the COVID thing in the last couple of years. I mean, here we are doing a meeting that in the past probably would have tried to organize it around an in-person kind of session. And yet, this has totally revolutionized how a lot of us are doing our business these days.
Yeah, I think COVID like warped us 10 years in the future. Whether it was intentional or not, we don't know. But it seems like, big companies knew they were too big and bloated. That COVID was a perfect excuse to like cut people out, do hybrid, try all the tests that they've been wanting to try. I think when you get that big, when you're like a government or like a big company, you come almost are like in a read-only state. You just can only keep doing what you've done forever. When you're starting a new company or building something new, then you can kind of build the future that you want. And so it's like you got these, I think it's inherent stuff that you inherit or stuff that you create. You got a read-only state or build the future we want. And I think that kind of cleaved a little bit, that allows us to start innovating a little more, but not as much as we need to, but it's definitely been interesting to watch.
Hey, Congressman, I'd like to, now we're mentioning stuff that will have impacts in the future. And Rob, you just mentioned 10 years. So Congressman, I'm curious on your thoughts as we move from a space force and a space nation that had a small number of exquisite systems into one with lots of lower cost. What are your thoughts on planning architectures for all this to happen? And how do we get there when we are very short-term focused and space, because it is still very difficult and very vast, that big architecture that probably should have somebody taking a look at? What are your thoughts there?
Well, the good news is that the commercial side of space now is going to allow us to keep out of some of the bureaucratic problems that are connected with using the government as the primary underpinning. I was on the aerospace board back when we were arguing whether or not you could build rockets horizontally. The fact is, SpaceX just went ahead and did it. And then all of a sudden, people say, "Whoa, yeah, it works." And it cuts costs. And, I don't remember us ever having a discussion. I left the board in 2017, and I don't remember us ever having a discussion about whether or not you could reuse first stage of rockets. But that has dramatically changed the way in which we deal with this. So, I think what we need to do is figure out how you assure that the best ideas out of commercial companies get the investment money that they need in order to go ahead. What you don't want to do is have them all dependent upon government money, because government money then feeds you back in to the same bureaucracies that already have their structures in place and don't want to change them. And so it seems to me the way forward here is to change the way in which investment takes place in space and moves ahead. I work for here at the firm. I work for IBX. IBX is an umbrella company that has Axiom, for instance, and Intuitive Machines that again were kind of unthinkable sorts of developments and before these guys showed that, yeah, we can build our own space stations. We don't need the government to do it. Now the government's partnering on it, but the fact is that the idea that you could move ahead largely came from private investments, maybe mostly Cam Gafarian, who took the money and made the investment that allowed this to happen. So at least as a initial thought on it, I'd have to say that figuring out a way to continue to encourage the commercial side is the way forward.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I love everything Cam's doing, from space stations to advanced nuclear reactors. He might just save the world single-handedly. But
yeah, I'm working on all that stuff with him. So it's a fun place to be.
Yes, yes. Well, I think Tim Crispin does a great job in talking to Wall Street. Wall Street wants to get involved in investing in space. They just don't really have a way to, measure the risk right now. And I was just on the phone with a space insurance group. And so it's interesting to watch all these pieces that are standard on Earth, but now they're starting to creep out into space. And, how can we, bond long-term space infrastructure like we talked about earlier? And is that a US backed bond, or is it a public-private corporation like the TVA did to develop the Tennessee Valley? Is that is that the right way? I know standing up a whole new government entity is not the right way, that's for sure. But creating some sort of instruments that allow us to bond some of this stuff that is for the public good would be amazing. And that's what I'm trying to do, is get these financial services and ways and means guys on, hey, join the Space Caucus, just get situational awareness on it. We don't want any special treatment, but there's there's things that you can do to help us.
Well, what a lot of these places need, including Wall Street, is an understanding of where the profit centers could be in the future. I'm involved with working on the space debris problem. Most of the vision of that is, well, we're going to go out and figure out a way to clean up the space debris. Very few investment people see that as being a profit center for the future. On the other hand, if you look at it closely enough, the fact is that you could clean up specific orbits and charge the companies that have really important assets in those orbits money for going into their orbit and cleaning it up. There's where money can be made. The fact is that there's a lot of really valuable material out there that is now waste material that could be collected and put into a parking orbit somewhere to be used for 3D manufacturing in the future. That might be another profit center that could be done with this. I mean, we've got to be organized so that some of the people who are willing to do risk investment understand that this is a place where the risk investment could pay off big time in the future. And that's just basically one arena where people right now see it as a problem. Well, it could be a problem with potential. Yeah. Is the issue.
Yeah, I never thought about like the specific orbits, cleaning up those, hey, you need this on this azimuth, we'll clean that up. We'll make sure that's clean for you. That'll probably lower your premiums and all sorts of things. So that's interesting to think about. One thing that I keep hearing from industry and venture and DOD is that maybe setting up some sort of strategic petroleum reserve in space, or an in-space commodities reserve, where the government will say, hey, if you mine a ton of water or platinum or helium or methane from an asteroid, the moon, or whatever body, the United States government will buy it from you. Just setting a demand signal that we will buy that. And you don't really necessarily have to appropriate anything immediately. And it just sends a demand signal to venture and industry that's, okay, let's go get the first ton of water and bring it back. What do y'all think about that?
Well, from my viewpoint, it's a similar kind of concept to the commercial crew program. Once you set a program in place that assured that the government was going to pay you for certain services that the government needed, it did incentivize an awful lot of activity, both in the launch arena and in the orbital structure. So if you can structure something like that, you've got something that we think shows promise in working going forward.
Yeah, and I'll add, Rob, that when as you were speaking there, what came to mind was kind of the concept that we already have in place here on Earth, called war reserve material, right? From a defense perspective, we store materials that would be utilized in a conflict all around the globe. We're working with a client who wants to take those materials and store them on orbit to be redeployed should a conflict happen on Earth. And you can take that and transfer that over to store other materials in space. I think it's definitely a unique and an innovative solution to solving issues of space and physical space that we have here on Earth. But it would be interesting to see how that could be applied to other areas, like what you talked about placing reserves on orbit for use back down here on Earth.
Yeah, I think I actually come from a mining background, and one of the most important things, it doesn't matter how rich your deposit is or your resource is, if you don't have the logistics to get it to market, it's not even worth looking at. So I think something like this could help build the orbital transfer vehicles, build the space superhighways, the gas stations, all the fundamental technologies that we need are going to be built through like the creation of this system. But hopefully we can get there one day. But
I think the important distinction, though, is that the government is not going to drive that infrastructure and architecture necessarily. The comment earlier about commercial is going to drive the architecture. Also, we're not going to rely upon the government to establish and build those gas stations in space.
No.
So as long as the government has agreed to be a consumer of those and send that demand signal, let's not rely upon the DoD or the Space Force or NASA to actually build that.
Yeah.
Let's allow us to be consumers of a probably more efficient commercialization of that aspect, and then buy that as a service.
Yeah, I think, for instance, one of the ideas that's out there that I have some concerns about our ability to do it with current technology, but the whole concept of space solar, for example, where you would have a product coming out of space that would come to Earth that could be done with commercial investment, strikes me as being, the kind of thing that has some potential. It's just that right now the cost of doing that isn't even nearly competitive with where the even most expensive kinds of earthbound power generation is going. So.
Yeah, I saw a company. I was reading an article yesterday. I think it's about a terrestrial-based concentrated solar company, basically just using high-powered mirrors to heat stuff up to 1,500 degrees Celsius, and that creates power. I think sun in space is 10 times more effective than it is on Earth. So it will be very interesting. I know there's a lot of companies working with solar thermal technology, like TransAstra is one of them. And it should be pretty interesting. There's not a really good way to test it on Earth because you're not getting the same intensity and you're not in vacuum. So we're starting to experience this, experiment a little more, and I'm sure we're going to figure some other things out. But I guess just to wrap this, go ahead, Bob.
Well, no, I was just going to say one of the things we may be able to do on the moon would be to use a solar application there that would be in orbit, and you could get it. You could do a test bed on that. I think we're going to move toward modular nuclear there as well. But I mean, but you may be able to get something done with permanent presence on the moon in the solar area.
No, especially in craters, permanently shadowed regions of the moon that you could build a tower and beam power down. It's people are working on this. I know firsthand that it's happening. So it's not science fiction anymore. It's a science fact. So I guess just to wrap this back into, the conversation of workforce development a little bit more. I see a comment here in the chat from Sarah talking about the role of VR and AR and into maybe training people in the workforce. I guess maybe Andrew or Severin, do you all in the Space Force side of things, are you all using virtual reality, augmented reality to help people understand to do their jobs better?
Yeah, so the Space Force and the Air Force as well are really starting to grasp those technologies into what is now called STARCOM, Space Training and Readiness Command. Air Education and Training Command before that has really taken a step forward with their A9 Innovation Directorate to implement those technologies to help train folks in a more agile, flexible, and cost-effective way. I think that the next big step that they're working on is making sure they don't have 10, 20 different types of ways to train, right? There's still you want to make sure there's a standard process in place. And also you want to make sure that all the different ways you train talk to each other, right? So if I go to a simulator and then I go to putting on an AR VR headset to then doing a desktop training, I want to make sure that the output from those trainings can all be fed to a centralized system, right? Because at the end of the day, the important aspect of training is to make sure that the force is ready to fight tonight, if you will. And the way that that is by aggregating that data to dashboards for commanders to understand where their folks are. Severin, anything else to add there?
Yeah, the number of space operators is not going up, but the number of space systems is. So it is vitally important to address those training needs in a manner that will allow folks to pick it up more quickly. So the operators that we have today are folks who have grown up with devices and screens from day one. So we need to switch from the paper checklist and the large volumes of publications that you pull out the hard copy, start flipping through, and we see that happening. The requests that we get from folks who are trying to put together these training modules for folks really heavily are interested in how do we make this more intuitive? How do we make it a learning environment that folks who are the operators right now are what they're accustomed to?
Are we going to create a Facebook game like Farmville, which will teach people how to weld rockets? I don't know. Is that what we need to get people to out of their screens and into the workforce? I think we got a big challenge. We got to think of creative ways to get people involved. We've got a short attention span, unfortunately. I'm pretty ADD myself, but I'm a little worried about the future sometimes. It's just how do we encourage people for a better future and how important space is. So let's see. Yeah, I'm seeing some notes from David in the chat that said that the Strategic Commodities Reserve is part of the Alliance for Space Development's virtual meetings with Congress. And so, yeah, I've read a lot about that, and that's kind of where I've been coordinating from all these different groups of these ideas. Again, I'm not the idea guy. I'm just trying to amplify the ideas that are already out there. But, well, if you guys don't have anything else, I think it's St. Patrick's Day. If you celebrate, I hope you all have a good time. And I really appreciate everything that you all do, teaching companies how to work with the DoD, Severin and Andrew and Congressman Walker. It's always a pleasure talking to you. I know you've got a lot of fun projects you're working on to help advance the space industry.
Just one comment I'd make, if you look over my shoulder there, you'll see a portrait on my wall of Mario Andretti. And most people wonder why it's there. I used to drive race cars, and Mario's a friend of mine. And Mario autographed that to me with a quote of his I use as a mantra, and that is, if you're in control, you're not going fast enough. And part of the problem that we've had in the past is we had too many people who want to control the direction forward rather than understand that you're probably at that point not going fast enough. It seems to me we need to put that into our mantra for what we do in space development.
I love it. I know a lot of smart people feel the same way, and it's inspiring to see all the investment in the smart entrepreneurs and people across the country that work in the industry and support it. It's so important today, and it's going to be most importantly tomorrow when when our children grow up. We want them to live in a free America like we do. So I appreciate everyone's time today, and I hope you all have a great St. Patrick's Day, and hope to talk to y'all sooner than later.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rob.